Well, today is Tuesday. Are we on the record?
We are,
Okay.
you say we are.
We're on the record. Today's Tuesday, January 16th. It's approximately about 8 minutes after 9. We're here today in Tallahassee for this administrative hearing in the case of John M. Drew versus Carlos E. Slay, DOAH case number 17-5835FE. It's a fee case. I've not done one of these before. Though I am familiar with the process, as I explained to counsel at one time, I was an advocate for the Commission on Ethics working at the Attorney General's office years ago. My name's James Peterson. I'm the administrative law judge, and I'll be presiding over the case today. Would the parties or their counsel please identify themselves, starting with the petitioner?
Good morning, Judge. Stephen Webster here on behalf of the petitioner, John Drew. Along with me is my co-counsel, Timothy Qualls, and Kayla Scarpone. Ms. Scarpone had to step out for just 1 minute, Judge.
Kayla Carpone?
Scarpone.
Kayla Scarpone. So are you gonna round robin on different witnesses? Is that the way we're gonna do it?
I think so, to a limited extent. I don't know, there's going to be a whole lot of round robining, but
Okay.
we're going to divide the labor a little bit, Judge.
Okay. For Mr. Slay.
Good morning, Your Honor. I'm Leonard Collins on behalf of Carlos Slay.
Okay. I see we have a court reporter. Is a transcript going to be ordered?
I anticipate so, yes.
Okay. Makes a difference in the way I take notes. This is an administrative hearing on the petition for costs and attorney's fees by petitioner Mr. Drew. Is he here?
No, sir.
Okay. Against respondent Carlos Slay. Is Mr. Drew going to be a witness?
No, sir, I don't anticipate.
Okay.
He hasn't been at any of the hearings so far.
Okay. Against respondent.
We listed Mr. Drew as a witness, and his testimony is really critical to us. I had absolutely no idea that he would not be testifying as a witness today, and that matters to us. So to the extent that he is not, is Mrs. Drew going to testify as a witness?
Mrs. Drew may testify.
All right. We need Carlos, I'm sorry, we need John Drew to testify as a witness. If he's not going to testify today, I mean, we're going to need...
Can you get him here today?
He's not, he works over in Jacksonville. He's working.
Was he on your witness list?
He was on the witness list.
He was on mine too. We didn't subpoena him, he was their client. And when they listed him as a witness, I fully expected.
Generally, parties you don't necessarily need to subpoena. I guess if you want to get them there, if you want to enforce it, you do subpoena.
Certainly, but in order to prove up our case, we need Mr. Drew here. So that presents a major problem for us. And
Prove up your case. Prove up.
in order to be able to
For your
establish,
defense.
yeah, in order to establish that they're not entitled to fees, Mr. Drew's testimony is critically important. And for him not to testify.
Well, I assume that he'd be testifying.
So did I.
don't necessarily agree or disagree as to whether he's critical, because I don't know. But I think you should probably get Mr. Drew here.
I believe he's in Jacksonville or Nassau County. So,
It's 2.5 hours.
yes, sir. I'll have to try to
You
reach
might
out.
want to give him a call as soon as we finish openings, or you can give him a call now.
Okay.
You have someone that can give him a call?
I can go try.
Yeah. Sure, give him a call. You know, I mean, I'm sorry, Judge, but our position is that
It's not, hey, you don't need to apologize. He's insisting. I think that insistence is not unreasonable.
Yes, sir.
Therefore, let's get him here if he's going to be, I don't want to delay into another day
Right.
because of this. He's entitled to him. He could get him subpoenaed or otherwise, So, I mean, it's not a gotcha. I understand. We should get him here if we can today. Okay?
All right.
Thanks. So again, this is an administrative hearing on the petition for costs and attorney's fees filed by petitioner Mr. Drew against respondent Mr. Slay pursuant to section 112.3177 subsection 7 of Florida statutes following the dismissal of respondent's consolidated complaints filed against petitioner with the Florida Commission on Ethics. Now, Mr. Drew, in this case, as petitioner, has the burden of persuasion. And that burden, as currently set forth in section 112.3177, as interpreted by its plain meaning, and both parties agree that Brown versus Commission on Ethics is the case that has interpreted that. I know there's Haddad, that I think it's Hadid or Haddad, another case that speaks to it, that maybe refines a little bit. Brown is at 969 Southern 2nd 553, and 560 is where they state that based on the text of the statute, the elements of a claim by a public official for costs and attorney's fees are that 1, the complaint was made with malicious intent to injure the official's reputation. 2, the person filing the complaint knew that the statements made about the official were false or made the statements about the official with reckless disregard for the truth. And 3, the statements were material. I see how Brown has departed from the Sullivan language, though it's very close still. I mean, I do have Brown, I do understand some of the niceties, though you may want to explain them to me again in your proposed recommended orders at the end of this case. So now both parties can give an opening statement. Counsel for petitioner will start, and then respondents counsel. You can wait until it's your turn to give an opening statement, or you can just alert me to the issues. I don't need a lengthy opening statement. You know, I'd rather just take the evidence. So, I mean, a minute or less is fine. You know, I've got some where they give 30-minute opening statements, but those are 3-week cases. Hopefully this will be done today. The difference in this proceeding and the proceeding that was initially filed is that there was going to be both a determination of liability for fees and then the amount of fees. Hopefully we've cut it close so it's just one day today in figuring out whether there's liability. In other words, if the Brown standard has been met, and that's what we'll do, and we'll wait for a recommended order on that and a final order on that, I guess, before the fee portion. So after opening statements, the evidentiary portion will begin. It's just like every other case. Each witness will be, you know, examined in the same way under oath. It will be, you know, direct examination, cross-examination, and redirect based on anything that was opened up talked about in cross. So my role is to listen to the evidence, to rule on the objections, and eventually issue a RO, which there's a couple of time frames. The statutory time frame is 10 days after the transcript is delivered. I usually entertain enlargement of that time as long as it's not really large, and you know, to give parties times to do it given their schedules. So, are there any? I know there's a pending matter on this new statute, not new statute, but this new sort of allegation, slap suit allegation, 768, 295. That's yours. That's yours, Mr. Collins. Tell me about that.
So the statute provides, and there's intent language that talks to it, but essentially it's the intent of the legislature to protect the right of Floridians to exercise their rights of free speech in connection with public issues. In this case, one of the issues is that my client has pursued a number of ethics complaints against Mr. and Mrs. Drew. And one of those ethics complaints has resulted in a state appropriation of approximately $1 million, annual recurring appropriation, that was between the state and Florida State University, and then somehow between Florida State University and Mrs. Drew's company, to be, number one, the subject of numerous...
We're talking about other complaints?
Yeah. And yes, we're talking about other complaints. And those complaints are still in the pipeline. They're still being reviewed. And there's an IG investigation into that complaint, the other complaint. And as part of that, the state, Speaker Corcoran, and the president of Florida State University, John Thrasher, decided that, number one, the appropriation of an annual $1 million recurring appropriation to Mrs. Drew's company, that Mr. Drew's also a part of, would stop. And we contend that this lawsuit, and when you look at the issues in this lawsuit, they're minor. They're minor issues, really. I mean, and just getting into the facts, just on a micro level, there's an allegation that Mr. Slay somehow inappropriately complained that Mr. Drew stored a boat on state property. Next to the boat, or near the boat, there was a camper that Mr. Drew admits.
I've read your pre-hearing stipulation.
So
I'm asking about whether or not I have jurisdiction for the 768.295 allegation.
You do, because the legislation didn't restrict a court's jurisdiction, and it's very broad in terms of the language of any suit. And so this is a suit, and this is a claim that was brought on behalf of a government official that we contend has been done in order to punish someone for seeking redress.
Well, I mean, there a lot of times there's flow-through constitutional claims that flow through these proceedings, and I don't do constitutional interpretations.
Well, we're not asking.
That's just not, well, I don't know. I'm just wondering how we're going to, does this really expand the nature of the information that we need to take here, the evidence that we need to take here? Or can we do it on the evidence in defense of the claim?
Well, I think there are two claims. So last night, counsel filed a motion, I think at 10 or 11 o'clock at night, that seeks to change the case. And so they moved in limine. I don't know if you've seen
No, I think this seeks to change the case in a way.
Just a moment. I don't know if the court's seen the
I have
motion.
not.
Okay. Do you
What
want-
is that?
Motion in limine, Judge, just asking for some kind of threshold rulings and to hopefully limit the scope of the proceedings.
Yeah, I don't know if it would limit the scope. You mean of this case?
Yeah, they've changed they've changed the specter of the case, and so if the court looks at the complaint that the petition was filed, the petition is very expansive and basically covers any complaint that my client filed. They now have limited the scope of their complaint to two matters. And I don't want to tell you their motion, but my understanding is that they've limited the claim to two matters. One is the issue of the boats, and two is an issue of employment. The employment issue is absolutely tied, because it's the same company, is absolutely tied to the state appropriation. And so we believe in order to be able to put on our defense, we should have the ability to ask questions about the state appropriation and the issues surrounding it in order to establish that there is bad faith and that this complaint has been filed in order to punish Mr.
Well, let me
Slay.
ask you this. Is the complaint about the employment issue, were you saying, that he does not want to bring up now? Or-
No, he does.
Okay, what's the other one that he does not want to bring up?
So
What is he excluded?
there's a sexual harassment issue that they've decided to exclude.
Do you have a copy of that motion?
Yes, sir, we do.
But they can speak to it better than I.
Sorry.
I only read it like, I was in bed when I read that motion. It was filed very late.
If, Judge, just briefly, we received, I don't know how many thousands of, 1,000 pages of exhibits yesterday from the.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of stuff too here that was filed with the complaint, so, as far as the exhibits, et cetera. Okay. One at a time now. 768-295, you're going to argue that it is applicable and I somehow have jurisdiction to make that determination in that proceeding. I have doubts about that. You've got to convince me of that in your post-hearing filings.
That's all we're asking
I don't want expansive testimony as to this issue. That's beyond the scope of what we're doing here. And that is, was there a false claim that was filed against?
It doesn't have to be a false claim. I've
I've laid out, but I don't need to reiterate.
Understood.
Okay, yeah.
Understood.
Was there something within Brown that would support a claim under the applicable statute? That's the main focus of this hearing.
Let me try and boil down our position in a way, perhaps that.
I don't want to boil it down anymore. I'm just saying that you're going to have to convince me of this at some point in time, and I would say in your post filings. I don't want to, if you go beyond the scope and you're saying it's to address this issue, tell me about it, so at least we'll parcel out that, Okay? Now let's look at the petitioner's motion in limine. Okay, and I haven't gone back to your petition, but Mr. Webster, does the original petition focus on all 4 of those actions that are identified in paragraph 4?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and what you're saying is, we just want to approve 2 of them?
I think Ms. Scarpone is we're gonna divide the labor charge, if you don't mind.
It's actually 3. It's kind of been described as 2. It's really 3. There were 7 separate allegations. The allegation as to the school board was really 2. It was one that he misused his position to get his wife employment and also to get his wife's company's contract. So those are kind of split, but I think the parties in the court have kind of put those together. So really it's 3 now. The boats.
Well, let me ask you, it's 3 now? Which ones?
It's
The
3
boats?
now. The boats, Dr. Catherine Drew's employment contract
Okay.
and the contract with her company, Florida Psychological Associates. Those
That's
are-
still on the table?
Yes. And they kind of go together because I believe respondent alleged essentially the same thing as to those 2, the employment contract and the contract with the company.
So number 4, petition actions relative to the allegation of sexual harassment asserted against him by subordinate employee are not going to be the subject of this proceeding?
No, those are not, statements involving those allegations. We are not seeking to prove anymore that those were knowingly false or maybe
You're not
they're
seeking to
reckless.
prove anymore. Are you stipulating that they were not false within the Brown
Within
decision?
Brown.
Yes, within Brown.
So they're saying they're not false?
I don't have an objection. I would point out that this last second again, and so we've prepared for this.
Well, you're prepared for it.
But again, understanding that they're withdrawing it, we're not. I mean, I'm not going to fight them to keep it in, so that's fine.
They don't have to prove that that's
Essentially, that's
false,
off.
and you don't have to prove that it's true.
It's off.
It's off the table.
May I
So in
add
essence,
something?
you're stipulating that it,
Your Honor,
Okay.
also in our pre-hearing statement, we also really fleshed that out, that it would only be those 3 allegations. We did not include the harassment.
I have
or
looked at the
statement of
pre-hearing
the
statement, I didn't realize it was doing that, but I didn't know when it was being brought, okay.
I would point out, and I think there's an overarching issue in the case, and that is that I cannot tell you for the life of me what the false statements my client is alleged.
Well, I mean, that's what this hearing is gonna be about.
I don't know what they are.
Right, I
So-
understand, I understand, I mean, yes, I understand. So accordingly, I should exclude portions of exhibits 2 and 3 insofar as they relate to the sexual allegations. What are portions of exhibits 2 and 3? I don't know what that is.
So these are my exhibits 2 and 3. Exhibit number 2 is an expert report that we have prepared, and exhibit 3 is supporting documentation behind the expert report. if they'll stipulate to withdrawing 2 and 3, I haven't seen a proposal in terms of what you want excluded from the report, so I don't know how to do that aside from saying, I don't have a problem if we provide the report and the court doesn't pay attention to the.
Yeah, I mean, if it doesn't go, you're saying that you want anything that has to do with the sexual harassment disregarded by me, and there's no reason for us to have to worry about it.
Correct, and there's a whole section of the report that's labeled sexual harassment.
So,
So, we just don't need to
but
get
if
into
there's
it.
something in that you want to retain for some reason that relates to the others, but other than that, that's fine. And you agree, Mr. Collins?
Yeah, we agree. I mean, I don't want to find myself in a position where we're somehow redacting the report.
I understand.
But
Right.
otherwise.
That's why I said, that's why I gave you that preservation language. If there's something, this relates back, but okay. Additionally, respondent has included many other voluminous exhibits that are far beyond the scope of this proceeding. Well, we'll take those up as they come.
Paragraph 11
Yes.
seeks to exclude material that's not sexual harassment, that really is more slap related. Or it's kind of a mishmash of both.
SLAP related.
That's correct. So those are documents, they're Florida Psychological Association. I mean, they're documents that relate to issues surrounding Mrs. Drew's company, that her employment is still an issue in this case.
I'm going to rule on those as they come up, okay? So your motion in limine to the extent of the stipulations of the parties as far as the sexual harassment documents and evidence as to that is granted. But only to the extent that stipulation of the parties, that we're not going to get into the sexual harassment. Otherwise, you know, objections are preserved, as is the ability to try and get that in. Okay, see where we are. So, I've given you my doubts about 768.295. You can maybe change my opinion on this, but this to me looks like something for a circuit court jurisdiction, general jurisdiction. It seems to be beyond the scope of mine, but I can be reconvinced, and hopefully there'll be enough evidence there, if you can convince me that it should be done, that we can use that. But at the same time, I don't want to go too far in these proceedings. So are we going to have opening statement, or are you going to reserve yours? Mr. Collins?
I'm going to let them go first, and I probably will reserve.
Okay,
I'll reserve the right to reserve.
Okay, let's see here. Is the rule going to be invoked?
It is.
Witness sequestration rule is invoked, okay? Are there agreed or pre-marked exhibits?
There are not.
Okay. Opening statements.
Good
Any
morning.
other questions first? Anything else? Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Judge. Stephen Webster once again.
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, we do believe we're going to be able to show that basically this case should be framed around 3 issues. One involving the boats, the allegation that Mr. Drew stored his boats. We believe the evidence is going to show that Mr. Slade made no reasonable attempt to investigate that claim. He ignored all of the clear evidence that was present on scene that would show that the boats did not belong to a private citizen and were affiliated with FWC in filing that claim. And he did so maliciously against John Drew because he was a political opponent of John Drew's. He was opposing Mr. Drew in for the race for tax collector, and basically he would stop at no cost to try to win that election. It included filing multiple ethics complaints against multiple public officials if they were in any way affiliated with or friendly with John Drew. In addition to the boat issue, we have the issues that are kind of ancillary issues, or they're tied together, which is the allegation that John Drew misused his public position to get his wife either business contracts or a job with the school board. And this isn't an allegation that Mr. Drew was friendly with, or that there was an appearance of impropriety. I mean, the specific allegation that was leveled against Mr. Drew was that he misused his public position. And what Mr. Slay alleged, and he argued to the investigator on behalf of the Commission of Ethics who conducted the investigation, was that Mr. Drew basically extorted school board members by refusing to disperse tax dollars that he'd collected and that were owed to the school board if they did not acquiesce to his whims and his demands that his wife receive these jobs and contracts. The quote that Mr. Slay offered to the newspaper was, "He who holds the gold rules," basically. And in support of his complaint in that allegation, Mr. Slay submitted a newspaper article that he originated. He went to the newspaper, he leveled these accusations against Mr. Drew there, and then relies on his own quotes to supplement his complaint. And there's going to be a lot of revisionist history here today, Judge. We believe we're going to see a lot of trying to backtrack and crawfish away from what really happened in this case, and that too should prove to this court that it was malicious, that Mr. Slay knew what he was doing, and he just made reckless allegations against Mr. Drew without any proof, and the evidence will show that.
Mr. Call.
Thank you so much. Judge, we talked about Brown, and I'd like to talk for a moment about Hadid, because I think Hadid is really critical in terms, it's a 2017 first DCA case, and one of the critical elements in that opinion is that in order to analyze an ethics complaint under 112.3177, the court must shed legal conclusions. The court must shed hyperbole. The court must look to the actual complaint and see if the facts that were asserted by a petitioner, in this case the respondent, but initially the petitioner, were false. And in this case, there are no false statements that can be attributed to Mr. Slay. None. You can hear one in opening, and you won't hear one throughout. What Mr. Slay did was he took what he had in terms of facts, wrote them out, and then he took the law and wrote it above it. And so he drew a legal conclusion, which under Hadid's, the court is explicit, the first DCA, about how that is not, that's not a false statement. That's not a false statement, it's actionable. And so we will talk and you will hear from two witnesses on our side. Mr. Slay is going to explain what he did and why he did it, and what he believes and why he thought it was necessary to bring a complaint to the Commission on Ethics. These are not minor complaints. The nexus of all of the complaints that Mr. Slay has are real complaints that are not manufactured, that are not there for the purposes of beating a political opponent. They're there because Mr. Slay sees something wrong in government and sees an elected official who's acting in a way that's troubling to him and that he believed was in violation of the law. Mr. Drew is going to testify that he left a camper on state property for months and months on end, which is what the Commission on Ethics found. And so when counsel talks about the boat that was on state property, it's critically important to understand that that boat was feet from Mr. Drew's camper that they admit was there. So how can they, in good conscience, come to the court and say, well, Mr. Slay knew that the camper was Mr. Drew's, and he also knew, but lied, that the boat that was next to the camper, near the camper, wasn't his. That's stretching facts, and we believe that the evidence will ultimately show that to the extent that there was an error, there was an undercover law enforcement boat, that was an honest error. That wasn't someone who was malicious, who was acting in bad faith to make a false claim. The other thing that I think is really important is the standard of evidence. It's clear and convincing in this case, and that matters. So it's not a preponderance, it's clear and convincing, and we think that's a pretty high bar for the petitioner to overcome in this case. So you'll hear from two witnesses, Mr. Slay, who will testify, as I just explained, and then you'll hear from an expert who's going to testify that he also looked at the investigation.
Does Brown speak to clear and convincing?
Yeah, and so does the administrative rule.
Right, in the statute.
Yes, and so it is. Sorry, if I have just a moment, because I pulled it. The Florida Administrative Rule, yeah, so it's Rule 34-5.0291, paren 4.
Excuse me, 34.
34-5.0291, paren 4.
Is that specific to Commission on Ethics?
It is.
Okay.
And provides that the standard in this type of proceeding is clear and convincing.
Yeah, I mean, that, and indeed it is in those cases generally where a state is seeking to impose penalties, but that follows. Do you agree with that?
Sir, I'm sorry.
The standard of proof is clear and convincing.
We're trying to verify that, Judge. I'm sorry, we can't agree to it right now.
Okay. But if this is a Commission on Ethics rule and it speaks to this very type of case, and I'm assuming it does, but there are some, I had a proceeding not long ago where it was a state trying to prove a fine against someone, and we've got that line of cases that say clear and convincing, but there was a statute that permitted it by preponderance, which is different. But anyway, go ahead.
So we've got an expert, and the expert went back and retraced Mr. Slay's steps, and has a report that we're gonna discuss, and ultimately makes conclusions and findings that Mr. Slay.
Is the expert going to be here?
Yeah. And he makes findings again that this is that Mr. Slay's investigation was reasonable.
I'm going to object to that, Judge. I mean, there is a concern with that in the report. I mean, basically, there's conclusions of law that would usurp the province of this.
Maybe. I mean, you know, I was wondering, is that one of my ultimate conclusions? Do I need an expert to tell me when someone has filed a report or complaint that meets the Brown and Hadid definitions? But we'll see.
Really, the intent is for him to provide background in terms of what occurred, and to show that as an investigator that he believes that was an appropriate investigation.
We'll see. And
But
we'll hear the objections as the testimony
But,
comes in.
ultimately, the point here is that Mr. Slay is a citizen who made a complaint, and there are countless citizens in Florida who see elected officials doing things that are troubling to them. And those troubling things, ultimately, when they're brought to the Commission on Ethics, many times no probable cause is found. The idea of turning around on someone like Mr. Slay and charging him with, at this point, the latest fee estimate we were provided with is $82,000, plus the cost of defense, plus the cost of this case, is unbelievably onerous. And so we believe that in the totality of the circumstances that he didn't violate Brown, and that ultimately the court's going to find in his favor. We look forward to putting on the evidence.
Okay. First witness, is it going to be Mr. Webster?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Your Honor, we would call Mr. Slay to this case.
Okay, Mr. Slay. You can have a seat, Mr. Slay.
And before we begin, Mr. Slay has some health concerns.
Blood pressure with the back surgery. If I sit too long, if you see me moving.
You can stand up if you like, or if you walk around if you like, whatever it takes.
So right now, at this point in time, I hate to say it, these water pills with the blood pressure has just kicked in, and I really like it. Go to the restroom.
Absolutely. Anyone needs a restroom break, that, you know, we want to make everybody comfortable. So let's take about a 5-minute break. The restroom's right out there. Okay, Mr. Slay, if you'd raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm the testimony or evidence that you'll give in this proceeding will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay. Could you state your name for the record?
Carlos E. Slay.
Your witness.
Good morning, sir. Good morning. Mr. Slay, I'd like to begin, if I could, with the complaint that you filed on February 8th, 2016. Okay. There was an allegation contained within that complaint where you alleged that Mr. Drew used his public position to convince officials within the school board to hire his wife. Are you familiar with that allegation?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir, what evidence did you have that Mr. Drew misused his public position to convince the school officials to hire his wife?
On a public record, not a public record, excuse me, when I searched the Florida Corporation status of corporations, when you look for the company who's on it, and then I pulled a public records request from, I believe it was the school board, and those showed the documents of the contract that Mr. Drew had his name signature on it. The corporation showed Mr. Drew as the president and the registered agent on that, and all the W-9s.
On what contract? What are you speaking
Of the school board contracts for his wife, he asked me.
Okay. So you made some public records requests, and you obtained some contracts from the school board that, explain to the judge if you can, what exactly you received, that caused you to form your belief, your good faith belief, that Mr. Drew had misused his position, his public office.
When you use the position that Mr. Drew took is when he went and met, and Mr. Drew admitted that he met with 5 or 4 of the elected officials of the school board. He has sworn affidavits that he met with them, he talked to them about the contracts, obtaining a contract for his wife of the business while she was an employee at the school. And then those documents filed when the contracts come in of using his position as the tax collector, which I believe he should not have. He signed it, I took it when I looked through all the records, and it showed Mr. Drew, the registered agent for his corporation that was set up, with the license, the address that he used on License Road, the tax collector's office for the state of Florida. And his vice president was Mr. John Martin. His wife is the chairman of the school board. And I believe the secretary was Mr. Qualls there. And all of those documents coming in, Mr. Drew signed all the contracts in his position.
And I don't want to interrupt your testimony, but Mr. Collins, do you have these copies of these documents that he's referring to, just to put them in context? Take them out of order, if you will, if he wants to show, because he's talking about documents, and as far as his rationale, I'm not going to follow it as well. Is that okay with you?
It's fine with me if you take it.
If we can, if you did a public records search and you came up with these documents that had Mr. Drew's name on them as tax collector.
It has Mr. Drew on it.
Mr. Drew?
Yes, as the owner, business manager. I'm not, I haven't
As the
looked at it.
owner, okay, well, let's look at
Yes.
them. That's what,
I think,
we can take them out of turn.
sure,
Yeah.
if you look at notebook 2,
Do I have a notebook?
you do, I'm sorry, Your Honor, they're behind you.
And Your Honor, since we're kind of doing that now, can I give you the bench book for our hearing?
Absolutely,
exhibits?
sure.
And these have been provided to.
Okay, good. Awesome.
And they're numbered.
Yeah, we've exchanged.
Okay, so notebook 2,
Yes, Your
what documents?
I just want to, unfortunately, they're not Bates, which is probably going to sting us a bit. Is this what you're looking at, John Drew FPA?
And Judge, we received from opposing counsel basically these 3 notebooks yesterday, so you can tell me, Mr. Collins, and look
Yeah,
at
just let me
your exhibits.
have my client find it.
Yes.
Judge, may I approach?
Sure. Thanks. These are your exhibits.
Take them out.
Don't take them out, just identify them.
Identify where it
And
is.
just tell us where it is, and I'll help everybody find it. I
Notebook
apologize.
2 of 3?
Yes.
That's where we are?
Yes.
What tab?
Tab
number 2.
Well, they have,
They have different names, but
Letters,
it's a
not-
second tab, so it would be tab CC under Drew.
CC. Okay, CC,
Actually, I'm sorry, DB.
DD, tab DD.
And then what page are they closed? It's 1 of 3, sorry.
This is not, this is not the one. This is not the one.
Is that it?
This is one of the, let me see it. It's not the one. It's not the one.
While he's doing that, Mr. Webster, do you want to put in to evidence the allegation that you're examining Mr. Slay on?
Yes, sir. The complaint. Which tab is it in our book?
It's not in that book. We're talking about 16023. I took out just the article. And, yeah. Is that okay?
Ma'am? It's not in the notebook that we gave the judge?
No, because it's filed as the complaint. It's filed as an attachment to our petition. I can get
Yeah,
that.
you know, you can do it as an attachment to your petition, but it's so voluminous.
Oh, yes,
You can
sir.
see.
Yes, we'll do it however you want it.
This is, well, I just printed it, and it just came up like this, so I need to know, yeah. Is
John,
that it?
That's the relevant portion.
I have the rest. I have the entire thing.
Do the-
This is
give me the
relevant.
entire
That's it,
thing,
right?
and I'll just accept it into evidence. It's just because it was filed, doesn't mean it's in evidence.
Understood. We'll get
Yeah.
you. Thank you, Judge.
I thought it was in the notebook, Judge, I apologize.
Right, that's okay.
All right, so actually, Judge, this is also attached to the complaint, so this is,
It's attached to the
it
complaint?
was.
Well, if that's part of that, that would make it all easy. I just want to follow your logics on both sides.
So,
Hang on. They're going to get me the entire complaint.
Wait,
so in
here it is.
our, Judge,
Is that okay? Do you have plenty of copies of that?
Oh, yes, Judge, our office is real close. I can get more.
Okay.
How long we have
Do we have
papers?
another one for the witness?
Our exhibit 4 and 5 is that, I believe. Is that
The full
correct?
copy of
I believe so,
16023?
Yeah, do you all?
There's in that black
So it might just be
binder,
easier for everyone
is
to
that
just
your
use our
copies of the
exhibit.
relevant portions for the
That-
witness?
That's fine, though. We don't need it as a, if it's already designated, you say 4 and 5. I see. A,
Different book?
But they are A, B, and C. I don't.
This might be easier just to,
Yeah.
Number 1.
Judge, we have the,
I see, just a minute. If it's the same, one and the same, it's your exhibit number what?
4 and 5.
number 4 and 5. So
Yeah.
R4 and 5, and you have, do you want to compare them with yours that you have? So we know.
That's notebook 1, just for everyone's ease. Books 2 and 3 are the basis of the expert opinions. My exhibits in this case are numbered 1 through 17. They're all in exhibit number 1, in notebook 1, but for the backup.
Okay.
documentation.
Exhibits 4 and 5 are 2 separate complaints, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, are we
With
looking at?
attachments.
Okay, the one we're talking about now is what complaint? Is it number 4, R4? Mr. Webster? Sir?
Yes,
Is
sir,
it
I believe so.
R4? Okay, R4, does everybody agree that R4 should come into evidence?
Yes, sir, I'm trying to just double check that it's
Of course.
the same that we
Yeah,
have.
make sure that it's.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you, I apologize.
Yeah, I just want to follow.
I'm not offended.
I'm sorry.
You didn't confuse me, I just wanted to see what.
Now,
the
within,
basics were.
within that complaint,
Well,
let them get.
let's get the
Together.
questions, okay, R4.
So several pages. And you see the number in the bottom corner?
Yeah, I do 16, 17.
So that's all the way through 20.
This one goes to 21,
21 from Jack to
yeah. 22,
That's good, that's all.
yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Sawyer. Mr. Sawyer.
Yeah.
4, records request, yeah. Copy of approved budget.
27, 28, 29.
Thanks, Carlos. And then all these uncontrolled copies, all the way through 38. 39 is, it's a response to 1 and 4 are attached. Do not. Got to.
Justify this under.
40, yeah.
Thanks, Carlos.
Yeah.
Check 2 million. Okay, now several more,
Yeah.
all the way through 70. 71 is a letter from Barbara Peterson.
I tell you what,
This
is
is
it okay?
newspaper
So far as everything checking out?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll do R4, put someone to task to make sure that it's not, that there's nothing missing or nothing extra, okay?
Okay.
But let's go with it for now, Mr. Webster.
Yes, sir.
The allegation you were referring to was what, where in this complaint?
It's the, sorry, Judge, now I've got to shift gears on you again.
That's okay. And I'm looking at R4, is that the one that's coming in?
Yes, sir.
Okay, complaint
16023. That's the
Okay.
complaint.
16023. I'm accepting that without objection.
I'll get you.
I mean, we could,
It's our,
we could almost take it as a joint exhibit.
Sure.
Okay, but it's in, I know it's out.
I think there's some of those that are likely going to.
Right, but I don't care, so I don't care if it's joint, if everybody agrees it's,
And just for, that's 16023?
Yes, sir.
R4. It's already pre-tabbed, so I'm not gonna write on it or anything, it's accepted into evidence.
Your Honor, it would be allegation 3.
Allegation 3.
Allegation 3, allegation,
What page is that on there? I see your hand number,
it's the hand number, bottom of 8.
bottom of 8.
Yes, sir. And then the bottom, and then allegation 5 on page 9.
And allegation 5 on page 9, and that is,
Huh? I'm sorry. Yeah, but it'll be subsection C on page 10.
and subsection C specifically.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Sure. It's going to be allegation 3, misuse of public office on the bottom of page 8. That first bullet point, tax collector John Drew lobbied the school board to seek a no-bid contract for two companies owned by himself and his wife, Dr. Catherine Drew, who is also employed full-time by the school board.
Okay.
And then on page, it's allegation number 5, and on page 10, subsection C, Mr. Drew used his official position to influence the judgment of the superintendent of schools to offer employment agreement to his wife, who is also a part owner in the two companies they own together. And then supporting evidence is the news articles dated December 23rd, 2015.
Okay. And just, maybe I'm looking at school, but, and so I apologize, just for my own information. These, I believe these are all the allegations, is that accurate?
Sir?
Are these all of the allegations that you're proceeding forward on? So
With
we're
the
not gonna need
exception of the
the.
vote.
Oh, I see, okay, all right, I understand, never mind, thank you.
Okay, now, and you said, your testimony was, you supported that allegation, and I'm, repeat the allegation so you know what, the allegation that Mr. Drew lobbied the school board to seek no bid contract for two companies, owned by himself and his wife. And I guess when we go to page 10 in paragraph C, Mr. Drew used his official position to influence the judgment of the superintendent of the school to offer employment agreement to his wife, who's also part owner in two companies. And your evidence is, to support that, you said you looked at the public records.
Correct. I requested public records, as well as searched the sunbiz.org for the state of Florida on the corporation of the business.
And you found,
And I found the document that Mr. Drew was the registered agent with the license addressed 86130 License Road, which is the tax collector's office.
you have that,
That's the
Document.
document I was looking for, sir.
and
to
where
show
is
you.
that?
Council.
Well, you can get it,
Hmm?
you can get it.
Well, that's what we were, yeah. Is it attached to the complaint?
It's not. I mean, would it be possible for us to either take a break? I mean, it would be in my office if it's not.
Well, it's the copy, the evidence is listed in the complaint, right? Copies of the contracts between the school board and John Drew for the provision of mental health. Is that it, or no? It's something
Yes.
different?
Yes, so this is part of the contract, but the sunbiz was separate.
Okay,
It was the filing of the corporation on Mr. Drew's signature, his name on
I
it.
think Mr. Drew would concede that point too, but, I mean, it's public record, it's Sunday, so it's something we can call up online, I mean, it's not.
I just, you're saying that there are these things, you've described them to me, I guess it's the best evidence rule or whatever. I'd like to see what you're referring to rather than have a description, just so that I can follow the evidence on both sides, okay?
Yes, sir. And
Is that
I
okay?
hope you understand, I've never had a chance to ask Mr. Slade these questions, so I didn't know what he was going to say,
Well, I didn't know, but that's what you said. You did a public records search for corporations and you found Mr. Drew's name attached to these public contracts. Is that what,
On the sunbiz.org for the corporation, he signed it as the president or manager, and he was the registered agent on it.
Okay, I still don't follow without seeing the document. Can you give me the document? Anyone?
Got it.
Now, Mr. Slade, do we have a copy for the witness? Your Honor, if I could, I'd like to direct your attention to tab 5 of our notebook. It's going
Tab
to
5 of yours, yes.
be, yes, sir, it'd be the report of the investigation of the investigator, Ron Mullally.
Okay.
Can I approach, Your Honor?
Sure.
Mr. Slade, I'm going to hand you a copy. It's tab 5. Now, Mr. Slade, it's true, isn't it, that in filing your complaint regarding the alleged misuse of office, you attached the news leader article dated December 23rd, 2015 in support of that complaint. Isn't that correct, sir?
May I look at the news article, please?
Yes, sir.
This news
It's going to be in your book there, your tab R4. It's at the,
This book?
yes, sir.
Okay. I don't have no, okay.
You see the handwritten numbers on the bottom of the page, Mr. Slade?
Yes.
If you'll go to page 72.
Okay, maybe one of
You got it?
them. No, sir, forgive me, I'm looking for it.
It's tab 4, page 72, handwritten at the bottom.
I don't have it handwritten.
Do you have tab 4?
I presume that's where I'm at, sir. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's the, it's the complaint. It starts out with the complaint.
Here we go. I mean, can I just trade you?
Yes.
Remaining in the room.
You just have different tabs on it for some reason.
I'm just gonna set this on the ground until we Bobby reference this, okay? Yes, sir.
Your question, sir?
Yes, sir. You see the first page of the newspaper article there, beginning on page 72. It's from the News Leader, dated Wednesday, December 23rd, 2015. The title of the article is "Drew Answers His Critic."
Yes.
Okay. Is that the newspaper article, sir, that you attached and incorporated into your complaint against Mr. Drew in support of your allegation that he misused his public office?
It was one of many.
Okay. Now, sir, in the very first paragraph of the article, it discusses that you had sent a news release announcing your candidacy for the position of tax collector. Is that true, sir?
That's correct.
Okay. And now, sir, if you would look on page 73, relying on the handwritten page numbers on the bottom of the exhibits. In the second column, down towards the bottom, beginning with the introduction "Slay," there's a quote that says, "Earlier this year, the Nassau County School Board hired the incumbent's wife." Do you see that, sir?
I see it.
Okay, and do you remember making that quote, offering that quote?
Yes.
You see where you're also quoted as saying that the tax collector used his position to convince the school board? About 5 lines down.
I see it.
Okay. And sir, moving over to the third column, about 10 lines down approximately, there's a sentence that begins, "As the old saying goes, he who controls the gold makes the rules." Do you see that?
use in the third column moving forward.
Third column.
I see it.
Okay, you remember making that quote, sir? Okay, and then right above that quote, you said that the business relationship involves a close working relationship, a close working arrangement, sorry, to ensure that tax dollars are collected and then transmitted in a timely manner to the public entity that has levied the tax, right?
Right.
Okay, so what did you mean, sir, when you said, as the old saying goes, he who controls the gold makes the rules?
Didn't really mean anything by it, it's just the anticipation that the tax collector has to submit certain tax dollars toward all entities of the government. One of them is the school board district. Now, anticipation of the tax code, if you go say November, December, or say October, November, December, when the payments are due, all I was referring is in reference is that if you make two payments and they're not full payments, you put, in other words, you establish a cash crunch for the school board, and then they have to anticipate, send out a tax anticipation note that they need that money, and that was referred to by that was given to me on some emails that I requested from the chief legal counsel, Mr. Ray Poole.
When did you make those requests for those emails?
Probably 30 days ago.
Okay, so you didn't have that information when you filed this allegation against Mr. Drew?
No, I did not.
Okay, so going back to your allegation here, so you're alleging that Mr. Drew misused his public position because he controlled the gold. Isn't it true, sir? You were alleging that Mr. Drew was withholding tax dollars in order to basically force the school board and coerce the school board to hire his wife.
No, sir, I was not.
Okay. Now, you're aware that Mr. Moali, the investigator who investigated this claim, he interpreted your allegation that you incorporated, by incorporating this newspaper article into your allegation. That's exactly how he interpreted your allegation, and he investigated it as such, correct?
Yes, he investigated.
And he investigated it based upon the allegation that you made that Mr. Drew was basically withholding or threatening to withhold tax dollars in order to coerce the school board officials to hire his wife.
Objection, this is asking Mr. Slay as to what Mr. Malloy was thinking. How, he can't possibly answer that question. It's beyond the scope of his knowledge.
Maybe the investigative report speaks for itself, it may be hearsay as well, but I can look at that. A lot of this stuff that's going to come in as hearsay, I can use it to bolster or to corroborate. I can't use it as a, even without an objection, a lot of this stuff will come in if that's my sole basis for a finding in fact it's not sustainable on appeal.
Yes, sir.
But I certainly allow this stuff, and I can look at and see what Mr. Moali said. You can ask him about that if he agrees with what he saw or not. And you can point me out paragraphs, but he doesn't have to reiterate what was in Mr. Moali's mind. So to that extent, the objection is sustained.
Now, going back to Mr. Moali's report, if you would go to page 4 of it, sir. Are you on page 4?
Yes.
You see paragraphs 19 and 20, Mr. Slay?
All right. Yes.
And specifically paragraph 20, where Investigator Moali writes, discusses the newspaper article that you cited as your source of information concerning the allegation about Dr. Drew's employment. Dr. Drew would be the spouse of Mr. Drew.
I see it.
And in there, at the very bottom of paragraph 20, Investigator Moali noted that you further stated, quote, as the old saying goes, he who controls the gold makes the rules.
Yes.
You were questioned by Investigator Moali on that, correct?
That is correct.
And you were aware that that was, by incorporating that allegation and that quote into this report, that you were implying and alleging that Mr. Drew controlled the tax dollars, and by virtue of his control of the tax dollars, he coerced the school board to hire his wife.
I was just answering Mr. Malloy's question to me. And that was not to make any derogatory statement of saying he withholds any money. That was just a saying. That was not to say Mr. Drew is holding money back. Mr. Drew has never held the money back. He cannot do that by law.
Okay. So then provide the context for us, sir, that thus far has eluded all of us. What exactly did you mean by offering that quote? That Mr. Moali was clearly concerned about and investigating.
Just to saying, like somebody would quote on Caesar, Caesar has the power. That's all that statement was. That's all it was. It was just a statement.
Okay. And moving on to the bottom of the fourth column on page 73 of the News Leader article. And for context, it's quotes of John Ruiz, who was the Nassau County School Superintendent, at least at that time. And you're aware he was interviewed and questioned about these allegations, correct, sir?
Yes.
And he was questioned specifically about your allegation that Mr. Drew had improperly used his office to obtain employment for his wife, correct?
I read that in the paper that Miss Jessica Waters, she's the one that wrote this column.
Okay.
And I read that.
Before you filed your complaint, you read that?
That is correct.
Okay. And as a matter of fact, and you included it in your complaint?
That is correct.
All right. And at the bottom of the fourth column there, beginning with that first,
What page are we on?
page 73, Joe, sorry. The bottom of the fourth column is that last paragraph kind of beginning at the bottom. And the quote from Mr. Ruiz is, "No, John Drew, in parentheses, did not make any promises or threats or try to influence me on this matter. He knows better than to do that with me." Correct?
That's what it says, sir.
Okay. And then going on down in the next paragraph, Mr. Ruiz was further quoted as saying, quote, "I actually delayed putting it before the board by a meeting until I had time to look into it and asked our attorney about a potential conflict of interest, and he publicly stated and advised the board that no, he did not see any conflict of interest in accepting this contract." So you were familiar with this entire article, right, when you incorporated it into your complaint?
Yes, I was.
Okay. So you have the superintendent denying that Mr. Drew did anything to try to improperly influence, withholding taxes or otherwise.
That was Mr. Ruiz's statement.
Okay. What other evidence did you have to contradict Mr. Ruiz's statement?
Mr. Ruiz, the school board superintendent. The other statements that I have when I approached the school board at the monthly meetings to get information about this, of a conflict of interest of having this business contract and an employee.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'm not asking about a conflict of interest. I'm asking about what evidence did you have that Mr. Drew improperly used his position, his office as tax collector?
Mr. Drew himself went to 5 of the school board officials, elected officials. Mr. Drew talked with each and every board member that are elected officials in Nassau County. Mr. Drew stated in the paper that they all knew that I came as John Drew tax collector, John Drew citizen. But you cannot separate the two, John Drew civilian and John Drew tax collector. I voted for Mr. Drew. Mr. Drew was the tax collector. You cannot separate the two. And that's in documents of the affidavits and the motion in this article that Mr. Drew admits to it.
Okay, admits to what? What did Mr. Drew admit to? He admitted to misusing his office?
Mr. Drew admitted that he spoke with the school board elected officials. He had a meeting with each and every one of them.
With regard to his wife's hiring
His hiring and the contract.
and the contract.
That is
That's what
correct.
he said in this article too, because I'm assuming you're going to hear from Mr. Drew on this. And the article speaks to him meeting with folks regarding this first allegation. We're still on the first allegation.
Yes, sir.
Is that in the article or is it?
It is.
Okay.
Which part, Judge?
There's a quote from Mr. Drew, it's,
Would it be the one?
I think it's the next article.
maybe the next article.
Because this is, I'm Drew, under no circumstances do I use my official position.
There are two.
Citizen, I called them as John Drew Citizen, not Drew, not John Drew.
Okay.
Wait just a minute, Is this what you're referring to on page 73?
Yes,
Where it
sir.
says Drew?
Yes, sir.
Is that in reference to hiring?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so in this article that you incorporated into your complaint, you have Mr. Drew quoted as saying that he met with him as a private citizen, the school board officials that he spoke to, correct?
Yes.
And you have Dr. Ruiz denying that there was any improper influence exerted by John Drew on anybody, correct?
That was Dr. Ruiz' explanation.
Right.
I
So
took
what
Mr.
evidence did you have to
Drew's-
contradict those two things when you filed your complaint?
Mr. Drew's statement that he met with him.
Okay, but denying that he met with him as a tax collector. So did you have a statement that supports your allegation that he misused his office?
You cannot separate the facts. John Drew is the tax collector of Nassau County, Florida.
And you dispute that he also has rights as a private citizen?
He's an elected official of Nassau County.
Okay. Is it,
If it's, go ahead.
and so how is his meeting with school board officials a misuse of his position?
The facts, Mr. Drew is the tax collector. I believe under the ethics, elected officials go through a course every year of a conflict of interest. It was also posted in the paper.
Okay,
Conflicts of interest not to do stuff like this.
okay. You didn't allege conflict of interest, or you allege that he misused his office. And I'm just trying to define exactly what it is that Mr. Slade did. What proof you had that he misused his office? Is it just that he met with school board officials?
Mr. Drew's statements that he met with the officials, Mr. Drew, the signing of the contracts, Mr. Drew signed all contracts, addendum to contracts, W-9s. Mr. Drew handled the business. That is using his position. He used his email address, he used his address at the tax collector's office.
I believe I found a document that we're all looking for.
Oh, okay,
It's
the
page
one's what in
99.
the public record, which one is
I
it?
think it's page 99 of the complaint.
Okay. See if that is it, the handwritten, we're still in the same section,
Yeah.
99.
Carlos, is that what you were talking about? At least with regard to
Detail is Florida Psychology and Associated Healthcare.
healthcare? I believe the
That
address.
is
Is that what you're
correct,
looking
sir.
for? Beautiful, okay, I'm sorry. I apologize for the inability to find this document earlier.
Okay, this is the corporation that had the alleged no bid contract.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, did you have any other comments as to that? That's what you were referring to, right?
Yes, sir, that's what I was referring to you about.
You were on cross-examine on that?
I don't have my copy
I'm
now.
sorry.
I gave it to Mr.
Yeah.
Slade. Okay. All righty, sir. And how did that document support your allegation that Mr. Drew misused his public office?
Again, Mr. Drew is the tax collector of Nassau County. Mr. Drew used the address of License Road pertaining to business the business that him and his wife co-own together.
What is that licensed road? Is that his
That
tax
is the
collector?
tax collector's
Okay.
office.
Okay.
And, sir, but you've alleged that Mr. Drew did these things corruptly, with a corrupt intent, correct? That's the whole point of filing an ethics complaint, right, is that you're alleging he acted corruptly, correct?
Objection, the complaint speaks for itself. Yeah.
No, I'll allow it. Okay.
It's not corrupt, it's the conflict. So if you are going to do this, be the tax collector and be the business owner, then it would look like wrongdoings going on when you allow you and your wife together own this. So you would profit if she made a salary or the company made a profit. You both would then benefit from that.
And your allegation is that he signed this very contract, the no bid contract, he was the signatory?
Yes, sir.
Sir, you filed this complaint under Florida Statute 112.313, correct? That talks about misuse of office, public office, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the statute says misuse of public office involves, if I may read it, Your Honor, that no public officer, employee of an agency, or local government attorney shall corruptly use or attempt to use his or her official position or any property or resource which may be within his or her trust, or perform his or her official duties to secure a special privilege, benefit, or exemption for himself, herself, or others. And you were familiar with the statute when you filed this complaint, correct, sir?
I read it just like that, yes, sir.
Okay. And so, the allegation that Mr. Drew did these things corruptly, that was the allegation. What evidence did you have that Mr. Drew acted corruptly?
Mr. Drew is the tax collector, sir.
I understand that.
That statute, no conflict. That statute says it all. Do
Right,
not-
and, yeah, and in a way, there's no objection here, but the corrupt intent, I believe, is a statutory definition for corrupt intent.
Okay, you
If
concerned
you
that?
wanted to read him that,
Okay,
and
yes,
have him respond to that, instead of having him come up with the definition of corruptly.
Now, Mr. Slade, within the articles, though, we have at least some of the school board officials that you incorporated. We have some of the school board officials being questioned and denying that there was any improper influence. Mr. Drew denying that there's any, that he used his official position in any improper way. Correct?
Correct.
Did you have any record evidence or any evidence that contradicted that record evidence that you submitted?
Regarding as evidence or that statute, I read the statute, I'm not a lawyer, so my interpretation is not going to be on legal. It would be my interpretation as that citizen at the time I was looking at it, and that to me was wrong for that elected official to do that.
Okay, and the definition for corruptly means done with a wrongful intent and for the purpose of obtaining or compensating or receiving compensation for any benefit resulting from some act or omission of a public servant which is inconsistent with the proper performance of his or her public duties. So, hold on, just let me look at it for a second. So, you certainly have information, record evidence that Mr. Drew spoke to school board officials. What record evidence did you have, or did you have, when you filed this allegation, sir, that Mr. Drew acted and tried to coerce, essentially, some public official to perform an act that was inconsistent with the proper performance of their public duties? I understand that you believe Mr. Drew was going to receive a personal benefit from this. I understand that, if his wife got the contract. But my question is, what evidence did you have that he tried to force the school board officials to do something that they weren't supposed to do, that was improper.
Mr. Drew met with the articles. He met with the elected officials.
Okay.
Mr. Drew also met with Ms. Cheryl Wood. Previous to that, there's close ties there to Ms. Woods, who was over the hiring at the time of those positions in the school system.
Okay. He met with them, okay? And what evidence do you have that during those meetings that he acted corruptly, right, and tried to influence those school board officials to do something improper? Either an act or an omission that was
His
inconsistent?
act of signing the contract, his admission, he admitted it.
Yes, sir. And my question is that, what evidence did you have that he did something, he tried to get the school board officials to do something improper, sir?
I believe we're kind of saying the same thing over and over again.
It has to be answered as the objection is sustained.
Now, you said that you have evidence that he met, right? But other than this evidence that where he admitted that he met, but he denied that he did anything improper, did you have anything else?
Mr. Drew did act improper as the tax collector by meeting with them.
Okay. I don't believe that's responsive, but. Now, sir, if you would turn to page 5 of Mr. Mullally report. Paragraph 25. There where Mr. Mullally indicated that you had alleged that Mr. Drew misused his public position to convince the Nassau County School Board to enter into contracts with companies he co-owns with his wife.
Is that a question?
I just wanted to make sure
Oh,
you had a chance to refresh your recollection with it.
Yes.
Now, down at the bottom of paragraph 25, Mr. Mullally reported that you opined that Mr. Drew cannot separate himself from his position as tax collector, adding that when Mr. Drew speaks to the school district officials, even if they have a friendly relationship, the influence of his office cannot be ignored. Is that consistent with your recollection of
That's correct.
your testimony with Mr. Mullally?
Yes.
And once again, sir, so aside from the meeting itself, is that basically just the fact that Mr. Drew spoke with school board officials? Do you have any evidence other than that to support your contention that he acted corruptly?
No,
Okay.
just the documents that were filed.
Okay. And Mr. Mullally wrote a note underneath that paragraph. But once again, he says that Mr. Slade depends mainly on the newspaper articles for that allegation. Is that accurate, sir?
Correct.
Okay. And so aside from the newspaper articles, you didn't produce any additional evidence to support your allegation that Mr. Drew acted corruptly?
These are the original documents that were requested.
Okay.
What are those original documents?
The original, as I quoted to you, sir, earlier, those, the contracts that were
Are
signed.
they attached to the complaint as well?
They were not.
The contract, yes, sir, I believe.
I believe it is.
Yes, sir, it was in the book.
Yeah, I believe it's on 104.
104 of
The complaint.
the complaint, okay.
Maybe 10, yeah, 109. Probably should be look at it.
109, here we go, this, okay.
Yeah, I believe it's over here.
Listen.
Yeah, right. That's the contract?
Yes, that is the contract, sir.
And then 109.
109 is the signature page.
And that was all included in
It's all part of 4. Okay.
Yes, sir.
All right, sir, in Mr. Moalley's report there, in the note, and it's just quoting what Mr. Ruiz, or how do you say Ruiz, it's R-U-I-S. It says in there that, quote, "No, John Drew did not make any promises or threats to try to influence me on this matter. He knows better than to do that with me." Did you allege that Mr. Drew had made threats and tried to influence these
No,
politicians?
I did not.
In your comment where you said, as the old saying goes, "He who controls the gold makes the rules," you weren't in any way implying that Mr. Drew was threatening to withhold those tax dollars in order to coerce these
No.
public officials?
No.
Now, how many public or ethics commission complaints have you filed since you announced your candidacy, Mr. Slay?
1, 2, 3, 4. I believe 4.
4 against?
5.
Five.
That would be Senator Dean, Tax Collector Drew, 2 school board employees.
Okay, that's 4, and then,
I think that was it.
so you have Dr. Drew, which would be Mr. Drew's spouse.
And Dr. Drew, yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
Senator Bean. Who were the 2 school board employees that you filed ethics complaints against, sir?
Chairwoman Donna Martin, and at that time was Kathy Burns, who is the current school board superintendent now.
And these were, in your eyes, people that were friendly with Mr. Drew?
That is correct.
And were any of those allegations sustained against them?
Objection. I think this is, you want to talk about getting far afield and outside of the complaint? This is way beyond the scope of this inquiry.
I believe that that is beyond the scope. What's your purpose of your question?
It's to show the malice, Your Honor.
The malice that you need to show, not the malice would have to be against the complaints that were filed in this action, not other actions.
Okay.
So sustain.
Mr. Slade, prior to announcing your candidacy against Mr. Drew, how many ethics complaints had you filed?
None.
And now, you actually filed a criminal complaint against Mr. Drew, correct?
Objection, again, this is way outside
This is against
the
Mr. Drew.
the field of what this inquiry is about.
I'm not going to sustain that one. Yeah, I'll hear argument on it before what's the purpose of this?
It's, Judge, basically, in a nutshell, we don't have a jury here, so I can just put it on the table.
Is there a pending criminal matter?
No.
Is it gone?
Yes, sir. And
Okay.
essentially, Mr. Slade will file this.
You can ask the question.
You filed a criminal complaint against Mr. Slade. Against Mr. Drew, correct, Mr. Slade?
You need to explain a little bit more, sir.
You requested that Mr. Drew be investigated by a grand jury, correct, for criminal prosecution. You made that request to Ms. Corey, the former state attorney.
I had wrote Ms. Corey a letter stating everything that I had found in those documents that I sent to Ms. Corey, the state attorney at the time, the Fourth Circuit, was the documents of the newspaper clipping, the contracts, and also contained in that package were emails that was prior with Senator Bean, a lot of other stuff. I asked for her opinion to review and to look at it, for her to make that decision. I'm not a lawyer, I did not request for it. This was a crime being committed.
Okay. And Ms. Corey asked that an assistant state attorney review your allegations, correct?
Right. Objection. This is going into an area, again, that's outside the scope of this inquiry. I believe they want to introduce a letter that's highly prejudicial, that we don't believe is material, to somehow undermine what occurred in the criminal complaint. It does not in any way shape or influence any decision that's made in this case. All of those events occurred far after the complaint was filed. I don't believe they can use this material in order to undermine this witness.
I don't know if I made it clear, Your Honor, but the allegations that Mr. Slay forwarded for a criminal prosecution are in sum and substance the same exact allegations he made to the Ethics Commission. So this is,
Okay, and I mean, I'm gonna look, I guess, at someone else's review of those allegations and what happened there. And I'm gonna go ahead and look at that. I don't know how that will influence or impact.
We think it's highly prejudicial and
Highly
incredibly unfair.
prejudicial.
Highly prejudicial. And you'll see why. And frankly, part of a political campaign. These two people were running for office, and we would contend that the report that they're going to show you is highly prejudicial and completely unfair to Mr. Slay.
The report,
The letter, there's a political
the
letter.
report,
There's no report, there's a letter
from whom?
from an assistant state attorney
Saying
saying that Mr. Slay is
you have
a
bad
guy.
motive or whatever.
Yeah.
saying that he investigated. They've been investigated, they looked at them, there's no basis for a criminal prosecution, and basically admonishing Mr. Slay that publicizing false and malicious allegations as a political candidate against your political opponent is actually a felony in the state of Florida. He says you shouldn't do it anymore. And specifically, he references not only these allegations, but the vote allegations
But
as
this
well.
is post this complaint?
Yes.
And then Mr. Slate goes basically straight out to Facebook and starts to publicize the same exact allegations, including the vote allegations that we're about to segue to.
Or is this after the investigation and the dismissal?
Before, it's like while it was pending.
Go ahead and ask your questions.
Mr. Slay, you filed a criminal complaint, or a request for a criminal investigation with the Office of State Attorney, correct? That basically mirrors the allegations that you submitted to the Ethics Commission for investigation, correct?
Yes, I submitted a complaint to Ms. Corey. That was the first. And then she assigned it to Assistant Stephen Siegel, who was over the Nassau County District. I was never contacted by Mr. Siegel in any way, shape, or form. I had received a letter by Mr. Siegel, a phone call by Mr. Siegel, and an email of that letter at the same date that was posted in the paper. And once the investigation, he closed the matter of the case in his letter. I requested all of the investigative reports on it and everything. To what I have was my documents back. It was never an investigation.
And Mr. Siegel responded and refused to prosecute the case, correct? Essentially.
That is correct. Mr. Siegel wanted to, how would you say, Mr. Siegel wanted to condone me and punish me in his letter. And this is the one he published, that was published in the newspaper.
Now, you turned around and you wrote a letter to Governor Scott, right? Demanding that basically Mr. Siegel be investigated, correct?
Again, Your Honor, now this is way, way beyond the scope. This is totally irrelevant in this case.
On relevancy objection, I overrule. Go ahead.
Is that correct, sir? That you then requested that a special prosecutor be appointed to investigate Ms. Corey's
So
office.
that the prejudicial value outweighs the probative value this is prejudicial information, and there's zero probative value to it. What happened with Governor Scott and Governor
As far as
Scott?
what happened,
It's an
I don't know. He's asking if he wrote a letter to the governor.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, I did.
And then that was forwarded to a special prosecutor, correct? Based on your request.
That is correct. I received a letter from the governor that it was it was going to be referred to the Seventh Circuit, Mr. Larissa, for his office to investigate if Mr. Siegel interfered in my campaign. And when they met with me, they told me they're looking at it as an investigator as a criminal matter. And I was very shocked about it. I said, criminal. 18 hours later, I got a phone call from the assistant to Mr. Larissa, Mr. Dick, forgive me, I don't remember his last name, and he stated to me, we're not going to do anything about this. And then that's all I heard, and then a letter come out.
Now, Mr. Slay, even though, well, isn't it true, Mr. Slay, you were using your ethics complaints that you had filed against Mr. Drew and your criminal complaints as basically the primary basis of your political platform? Isn't that true?
No, I was not, sir.
Okay. You brought it up several times on your Facebook page, didn't you, sir?
I posted it on my Facebook page, just like any other candidate would, of everything what I was talking about.
Your allegations that you had, you alleged that Mr. Drew was under investigation by the Ethics Commission on numerous occasions on your Facebook page, didn't you? In advancement of your political candidacy.
That was already in public. Everybody already knew it.
And you were seeking to basically obtain a political advantage by virtue of the fact that you had filed these ethics complaints against Mr. Drew. Isn't that correct?
No, I was not, sir. No, I was not.
You didn't seek to use these ethics complaints and these allegations in any respect to gain a political advantage? That's your testimony?
No. Yes, that's my testimony. I didn't seek any kind of, Mr. Drew got 92%. Everybody already knew Mr. Drew. Mr. Drew outraised me more than anything.
I'm not asking you if it was effective, sir.
I'm asking you a question.
I don't think you are. Well, is it a no? Your answer is you did not seek to obtain any political advantage by filing these complaints against Mr. Drew. I'm not asking if it was an effective campaign. I'm asking whether or not that was your intent.
No, I did not.
Okay. So then what's the purpose of repeatedly putting it on your Facebook page that Mr. Drew was under investigation by the Ethics Commission? If it wasn't intent, if you weren't intent on trying to gain a political advantage, what was it that you were attempting to do by repeatedly putting that on your Facebook page?
I posted it one time, sir. That was it. Not repeatedly, so I don't understand that question.
Okay. Well, what was your purpose in putting it there once?
Information.
To serve what purpose, sir?
Information just to put out there for the public.
Okay. And you brought it up at the political forums, at the Meet the Candidate forum?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to this. I do think that there's a really important issue that counsel is talking about Facebook and complaints, but there are many complaints that were filed, and many of them are not the subject of this litigation. So is counsel suggesting that
Is your objection that you want him to tailor what complaints he's talking about?
what specifically what
Okay,
complaints?
specify.
Okay.
These complaints.
Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
And try to limit it to these complaints,
Yes, sir.
not the other complaints we allowed you to venture into, but these complaints, okay?
Mr. Slay, isn't it true that you, well, for instance, when you went to the paper with your allegation, the news release, okay, and you make the allegation there that Mr. Drew holds the gold and he's misusing his public office, you were attempting to gain a political advantage by putting that in the paper, weren't you, sir?
No, I was not.
Okay. It had no relationship in your mind whatsoever to your candidacy and to Mr. Drew's lack thereof, or lack of good standing as a tax collector?
Those articles in the paper were articles that Miss Jessica Warder was the reporter at the time. She had contacted me a few times and started talking to me about the candidacy, what I was looking for, what I wanted to do with it, and I was talking about accountability. And that was what everything was based on, was accountability. And then she started investigating the newspaper article that you see. She had called me back and she had told me, I think I'm catching on to it, but I'm catching heat from my editors on this. So Ms. Waters made the contact with me as a story, why am I running for the office of tax collector? And it was all about accountability.
Well, sir, if I could refer you back to page 72 of the notebook, your notebook, the complaint.
Paragraph page 72
Yes, sir,
of R4.
Yes,
Which is
sir.
the only thing that's in evidence so far.
And R4 is the entire complaint, correct, Judge?
It looks as though, you conferred and it is?
I think we conferred for about 80% of it, and it looks.
Okay, thank you.
The very first paragraph, sir, you submitted a news release announcing your candidacy, correct? The very first paragraph.
That is correct.
And then you also submitted a lengthy letter, right?
That is correct.
That included both statements about what you would do, as well as allegations concerning Nassau County Tax Collector John Drew, correct?
I have to see the document.
Oh, I'm sorry, I
The
took it
letter
away.
that I wrote, so I can just refer to it.
Well, look at page 72 of the article. You see where it's right there in that first paragraph. The introductory paragraph outlines it.
It was a letter that I had written about my candidacy, what I wanted to do.
Okay. Did your letter include the allegation that Mr. Drew misused his public office?
I'm not looking at that letter right now. I need to look at it to say yes to it.
We did ask for that to be produced, Judge, but we did not receive a copy of that letter. Unless it was buried somewhere in these 3 notebooks. We didn't. That was one of the documents we requested to be produced. The production, Judge, was just produced us basically just, bam. There was no delineation as to these documents are responsive to request number 1, 2, et cetera, so.
I guess you're asking whether that paragraph is accurate, that first
Okay.
paragraph.
How about that? Mr. Slay?
Yes.
It is accurate?
The first one of me submitting a letter to it, yes.
And the letter included both topics? As
Ye-
alleged in
yes,
that
sir.
paragraph?
Yes,
But
sir.
you don't
I don't
recall
remember.
which specific letter, but there was a letter that contained that information.
That is correct, sir.
Okay.
And it contained the allegations against Mr. Drew. Correct?
Without looking at it, yes.
And then you were questioned on those allegations in the article. That's what formed the substance of the article, right? That's how, what was the name of the reporter?
Jessica Waters.
That's how Ms. Waters knew to ask you about the allegation that Mr. Drew misused his public office, correct?
In this, she submitted an email with a questionnaire sheet, and I answered every one of them. And then she informed me that Mr. Drew would have the same opportunity as well.
And we must conclude here today that she would not have known to ask you about your allegation that he misused his public office if you hadn't included it in the letter and news release that you sent to the news leader announcing your candidacy, correct?
Ms. Waters already did an article prior to that.
Right, but she didn't, you had to inform her of the fact that you had alleged the misuse of office, otherwise she would not have known to send it to you in an email.
I just answered her questionnaire and put it to her.
So is it your testimony that she must have somehow obtained that allegation from some other third source that you were making that allegation?
Objection, asked and answered.
Sustained. Let's move on.
Now, do we have copies? May I just approach Judge?
Sure.
Shows Mr. Collins. Mr. Slay, I would like to show you a printout, and we have copies, Judge, I'm sorry we don't have them now, of numerous Facebook posts on different dates where you discuss the ethics complaint that you filed against Mr. Drew. If you'll, they're there on page, that first page and the second page.
You characterize it, could you have the witness tell us what it is instead of you?
I'm sorry, Judge. You're looking at a document there, Mr. Slade. Can you please tell the judge what it is?
This is a document with my picture, Carlos Slate for Nassau County Tax Collector. And there's a picture of a boat. And this is some stuff from Facebook.
Are those posts from Facebook? I'm not a real Facebook
I'm
savvy person. Are those your posts?
Yes, they are. I have to look at it. It's in a different format on the computer.
Okay, just confirm, yeah, just get him to tell me what that is, and then we can either take it into evidence or not.
Are those your Facebook posts, Mr. Slade, that you put on your Facebook page that was designated for your candidacy for Nassau County Tax Collector?
Yes, just like any other candidate, you post things out there, letting people know what you're doing out there, keeping them informed of what's going on.
Okay. And do you having an opportunity to look at those, or is that a fair and accurate representation of the post that you put on your Facebook page, sir?
Yes. Yes.
And the first one there's got a date on it. Do you see the date of that first post?
June 16th,
Okay. Of what year, sir?
there's no date on here.
Okay. Would it be 2016?
Yes,
It's before the election, correct?
2016 was the election.
Your post would have occurred before the election happened, the actual election date, correct?
That is correct.
And then on the next page, sir, there's a date at the top. I believe it's a June date.
June 24th?
Okay. And you see the post underneath that June 24th? Are those your posts, sir, that you put on your Facebook page in support of your candidacy for the Nassau County Tax Collector?
Yes.
I think I'd like to mark this as H1, if I could, Judge.
We're gonna call it H1?
If you don't mind, just
No, I
trying
mean,
to
just
designate.
so that, would it be PH1?
That might be
Okay,
better.
because I put an R in front of R exhibits, and I'll put a P, and then I'll do dash H1.
Okay. I'll just give that for hearing, if that's okay with you.
That's whatever, it's H1. Any objection?
I would note that what it appears to be is a single post with, if you look at it looks like there's someone saying, can I ask a witness a question?
Yeah, you can,
So, just, Mr.
just a
Slade.
minute, let me see.
Sure.
It's a string, Judge, and there's different dates.
Right.
Rather than characterizing it, you can ask him questions about
Sure.
it.
So, Mr. Slade, as you look at this document, the first page, which is June 16th and 302, that would be a post that you put on Facebook, correct?
Correct.
Don't leave,
Sorry.
okay?
Now, this
Even
next,
though it's in essence, it's for Dye or for this.
this next post is by someone named Martha Mira Vereen Millen. Is that a question? What is that? What is her?
That is a person commenting on the Facebook page and asking me a question.
This
She's
is
making
a
comment.
question. Is this your post, the next one? Is that response to the question?
Yes,
Okay, your response to her question.
that is correct.
Okay.
So just, do you know much about how Facebook works?
No, I do not.
So, are you aware that when you post, you
No.
post something?
No,
All right. We all know. So, is there a way to, it says on the third line, it says Page responded privately. Do you know who Page is?
No, I do not.
Do you know what that means, Page responded privately?
I believe they meant they sent it in a private format, only one person can see it.
And then, are these, what's below it? So
What
there's
are
a-
those?
There's a June 24th post at 2:55 PM.
What is that?
Yeah, that's my question. What is that?
This is announcing my campaign, and that is a website to go to, what I was running for, what I was standing for, what I would like to do with the tax collector's office if elected by the people.
Does that have anything to do with this ethics complaint?
No, it does not.
I'll ask other questions about it.
What about the last one? What's the last thing on there? I just need to, this. Carlos Slay for Nassau County Tax Collector Sexual Harassment. Whose post is that?
That is my post, sir.
Okay. And you posted that in June?
Yes,
Why?
because I was telling the people on my platform, when that allegation come out, that I would set up a policy that nobody has to endure that.
Okay. Thanks. I'll mark this H1 and I'll put my initials on it and receive it into evidence without objection, is that correct? It's P-H1. So it's received.
I would just ask if we could get a copy of that.
We will. I'm sorry, Judge, we didn't
Okay.
bring a copy today.
You need this to
Probably
get
do
a
to make
copy?
copies. I just don't want to lose
Here,
it.
I've done it, yeah, don't let me lose it. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Does anyone need a break?
I could use a
Yes.
break.
Okay, let's take a 5-minute break. okay?
Thank you.
Well,
Oh, sorry, Judge, thank you. I'm not exactly sure where we left off, but I'll just pick up seamlessly.
Seamless.
Do you need the
picking
last
up.
closing line?
No, I don't, I'm fine.
Mr. Slade, going back to page 73, which is the newspaper article, the second column, down towards the bottom once again where it says Slay. It says earlier this year, the Nassau County School Board hired the incumbent's wife, who recently received her PhD in psychology. The position was not advertised. Other applicants were not sought. The tax collector used his position to convince the school board to hire his wife, despite the fact she had no previous experience working with children in public schools. Sir, that allegation that he used his position to convince the school board to hire his wife, what evidence did you have to support that allegation?
The paperwork that Mr. Drew stated in the newspaper, that he met with the elected officials on behalf of his wife and the company.
Okay. So basically, just because we have two different allegations, once again, it's the allegation here specifically that he met with.
School board elected officials, Mr. Drew's statement.
Okay. Did you have any other evidence that you would contend supported your allegation that he misused his position?
The documents which I referred to earlier, sir.
Just,
The documents of the contracts.
okay. Now, sir, I'd like to turn, if we could now, to the complaint involving the boats. Okay, well, do they kind of dovetail with the boats too, or not? Well, Judge, if we could, just so the court understands, we did make a request to produce for all of the Facebook and other social media posts that Mr. Slay had created and published during the pendency of this investigation and his campaign. Those documents were not produced to us, so we basically are at the disadvantage now of trying to recreate the record. Some of these were removed after this petition was submitted for fees. So to the extent that we may not have a complete record, we tried our best to at least preserve the record by making.
Well, we've got PH1, which is in evidence. Are you saying there may be something else that was removed?
Yes, sir, there were, and we have some that we were able to preserve, but then we made a request to produce because by the time we went back to get.
Okay. You say you have some that you were able to preserve. Are there some in addition to PH1?
Yes, sir. And we've got them here. We're publishing on the screen right now for you. Some that we were able, that we did.
And you're going to submit these? Because I'm not going to rely on an electronic record.
We're having copies made.
Okay.
Yes,
These
sir.
exhibits,
We're going to make them exhibits.
were they listed as exhibits?
No, but this is impeachment. He just said he only
It
put
is
one post.
impeachment.
He only put one post,
Mhm.
so. And do you recognize, can you see that from there, Mr. Slay?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and if I may just kind of read along here. It appears to be posted under the Facebook page of Carlos Slay for Nassau County Tax Collector, correct, sir?
Correct.
Okay. The date is yesterday at 8:13 p.m. But you talk there about accountability, and you say that you received a call from the Ethics Commission where they have stated the legal sufficiency has been met to proceed with a full investigation of tax collector John Giroux. Correct, sir?
Correct.
Were you attempting to utilize the ethics complaint that you filed against John Giroux to gain political advantage?
Again, sir, no.
Okay. But you do admit that you made this post, correct, sir?
That is correct.
So your prior testimony that you only offered one post regarding the matter, that wouldn't be true, would it, sir?
Objection.
What's your objection?
Mischaracterizes, that wouldn't be true, is argumentative.
Overruled.
Can you reframe this?
Yes. You testified earlier that you only posted one time on your Facebook page about the ethics complaint and investigation. That this is obviously at least a second post where you discuss it. Correct?
I posted many, sir, as you always, anyone would, just post on there what is going on with the election.
All right, sir.
So that's yesterday at 8:13, is that what we're
That's
gonna?
not, yes, I apologize. I don't believe that's yesterday, like yesterday.
Obviously, that's the only, do you have another heading for that? Do you have a date?
Yes, it's before August 30th.
It's before August 30th, that's all I can tell the court.
Before the,
Well, you can tell me that, or you can ask the witness. if
That's
you
a good
can.
point. Mr. Slade, you made this post before the election, correct, sir?
That was before the election coming up. I was just talking to the people that look at the Facebook page, and just letting them know everything that was going on and everything. The power is in their hands. They control the votes, the people, the voters.
Yes, sir. And this post would have been offered created before the election in 2016, correct?
Yes.
So was it your understanding, sir, that the complaint and the investigation, that it was confidential while it was pending and under investigation?
Yes.
Okay. And it was your understanding that Mr. Giroux was supposed to remain basically silent about the matter while it was under investigation, correct?
I presume Mr. Drew was, but when I had talked to the Ethics Commission and asked them about, can this be published or anything, they really didn't have an answer for me. I can do with it as I please, as notifying the people, the voters, the citizens.
All right. Sir, this one's a little bit more difficult for me to read. Once again, it's under the auspices of the Carlos Slade for Nassau County Tax Collector Facebook page. Do you recognize
Sir,
it?
I can't see that.
Yeah, it's very difficult. May the witness step down, Judge?
Sure.
Mr. Slade, if you wouldn't mind.
What's the date on that one?
58 minutes. We'll have copies, Judge.
Okay.
Which
We were
refers to-
attempting, just so the court understands, we were attempting to preserve these as we were seeing them, preserving them for evidence. So that's why whenever they were captured and printed by us back at the time, you would get this date. That's why we had made a request to produce, it was request to produce number 10, I believe, to the respondent.
Okay. Go ahead and get him to identify. We're gonna, I guess, group these under H2. We're gonna mark them as
Okay.
H2, and you'll get them to me
Yes, sir.
when?
Today.
Okay, today.
Hopefully after lunch, if that's okay, Joe. But if I may just read a little bit here, Mr. Slay, it begins Thursday school board meeting in all caps, correct, sir? Do you recall offering, did you write this post? On your-
Yes.
Okay. And it talks about conflicts of interest that was debated at the school board meeting, correct, sir?
That is correct.
Okay. And then it says, I plan to attend the meeting and ask the members of the school board why they are refusing to follow the advisory opinion of the Ethics Commission, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, was this in relation to your allegations against Mr. Drew and his wife, that there was a conflict of interest?
That is Mr. Drew and his wife, yes.
Okay. And were
It
you...
attaches CEO 15-02.
Yes, sir. It attaches an ethics opinion 15/CEO percentage sign 2015-002.htm.
Do you have that?
I don't believe
But I mean,
so.
those are available.
Yes, sir, it should be.
Okay.
And if I can, Mr. Slay, on your, you had a web page also, correct, sir?
That is correct.
That was the www.carloslay or something along those lines?
Yes.
And, sir, isn't it true that you attached the allegations that you made to the Ethics Commission on your web page, correct, sir?
I will have to look at that again, sir.
Well, if I can I show can I approach?
Is that another one?
Yes, sir, it is.
How many do we have
No.
here?
I'm sorry.
How many we're gonna have here?
How many do you
I
have?
think that shows, that's,
3?
3. Apparently 3.
Okay. What's, can you?
this is,
That's the same one.
That's the same one?
That's
well,
the first one, I think.
I think it's different.
I think it's the
No,
same.
it's yesterday.
It's the
That's the first one that we showed.
Okay.
Okay. So we have 2 posts.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And those gonna be H2. Any objection to them coming in once they get them printed, or do you wanna look at
I
them
mean,
first?
I'd like to look at them first.
Okay.
I certainly would like, if at all possible, I'd like to ask some questions about the second one in particular. I don't believe it's in relation to.
But, okay, before I accept it or reject it, get them printed out and we'll revisit it, okay?
Yes,
The
sir.
witness is gonna be around.
Please make a note to read
Part of it, okay?
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Judge. If I may approach again, Your Honor, with P-H-1.
Yes, you got it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I'd like to show Mr. Slay, if I could, the second page.
It's been highlighted. Has it been highlighted since I received it or no?
It was highlighted when we
Okay.
produced it, but we'll produce clean copies.
That's okay, I don't care. Unless there's an objection. No objection.
Sir, do you see there, it's highlighted, where it discusses, visit www.votecarloslay, I believe it is, sir?
Yes.
Okay, and that would be the webpage that you created in furtherance of your campaign, correct, sir?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And there you say, you invite the viewers who are reviewing your Facebook page to go there to review the full documentation. Do you see that, sir, where you wrote that?
Yes.
What was that full documentation that you were inviting the people who were visiting your webpage to review? That you would upload it to your campaign webpage?
It would probably be the documents or whatever that I posted on there about what has been going on with the campaign, and then for them, just advising them what is going on in the campaign, those documents. I can't, off the top of my head, remember what was all put on the Facebook page,
Okay, sir.
or on the voteslay.com.
So where you wrote, go to my website at www.voteslay.com and review the documents, and you can draw your own conclusion or at least ask for answers. Is it your contention that those documents didn't include the allegations you made against Mr. Drew in your ethics complaint?
I'm not aware of that, sir. I'm not, your question, did I put the ethics complaint in there?
Did you put your allegations that you submitted to the ethics complaint, were they posted on your webpage?
I have to look at that page if it exists. It doesn't exist anymore. It come down after the campaign.
Okay. Now, moving to the complaint that involves the votes, which I believe is 16. Sorry, do you have a copy of the complaint file? There was
It's the
19,
the amendment to 16023.
Mr. Slade, do you recall how many times you amended these complaints that you filed against Mr. Drew?
Not right offhand, sir. No.
Is this in the book too, or the amendment?
I'm sorry.
This one, 31.
Yes, sir, that's it.
Oh, hey, I have the amendment, it's a part of, there's R
It's 5.
30,
Is it all part of our
R 31?
31 is under tab 5.
Yes, and there's an amendment, 1631 amendment?
Yes,
Is that what
sir.
you're,
Yes,
but
sir.
not a 1623 amendment?
Yes, sir. No, 16, there's
Oh,
both.
wait,
There's
wait.
both, Your Honor.
Oh, wait. Is there a 1623 amendment that you had? I don't have it in my book, I don't think. It's 1623 amendment. I have a 1631 amendment, that's what it's called.
Yes, sir.
The whole thing.
That was amended as well.
I just gave it to Master.
Starts out with the amendment,
It does.
and then there's an amendment to the amendment.
That's right. It starts out as an amendment.
But I don't see the 1623 amendment. Do you have it anywhere?
I believe
Let's see if we have
we
it.
submitted everything that we had, so. And I believe you attached it to your complaint. I'm just looking at your complaint. I believe it matches up.
Yeah, and your description of 4 is wrong. In your description at the beginning, I'm gonna fix your index, in other words.
It's got a typo.
It says 16031, it's 16032. I mean, 23.
2-3. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just gonna change
Thank you.
that. But I don't see the amendment. Maybe there, but I don't see it. So you have an amendment you're gonna give me, and we're gonna call it what? You have it pre-marked?
PH2, if you don't mind, Judge.
PH2? No, PH2 were those that you're
Okay, so
getting rid of.
PH3, I apologize.
PH3.
Yes, sir?
Mr. Slay, I'm going to hand you what's been marked for identification purposes as PH3. I would ask you just to look at that, sir, please. Do you recognize that, Mr. Slay?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Can you just please tell the judge what that is?
This is a complaint, an amended complaint for the misuse of public office, destruction of public records, misuse of public office.
Okay. And that,
Emails.
is that allegation, or that amended complaint, does it also include an allegation that Mr. Drew improperly stored his boats on the tax collector's property?
Yes.
Hmm? Sir, is that the complaint that you, the amended complaint that you submitted to the Ethics Commission for investigation against Mr. Drew?
Yes.
Okay. At this time, Your Honor, I would remove this into evidence.
Any objection?
The only, we want to be sure that the complaint that includes the RV camper that Mr. Slay stored on public, I'm sorry, that Mr. Drew stored on public property is also admitted into evidence, because we believe it mitigates. And so
There is
we would
one.
ask that all of the complaints be admitted into evidence, all of them. And not necessarily, just so the court has all, just the full gamut. of
There's
complaints.
another complaint that has a different number.
I think it's one of the amendments that deals with the RV camper, so I just don't want one.
I want the entire
The entire-
1623.
This, to my knowledge, is the amended
Does it
version.
have, does that have the boat and the RV camper?
I see a picture of the camper, sir,
Okay,
and a boat.
okay, camper and a boat.
Yes, sir.
And is the allegation it's a camper and a boat,
Yes, sir.
but the allegedly false is the boat, but not the camper?
Yes, sir.
Okay. R23, is there, we're going to call that PH3?
Yes, sir.
Any objection?
No.
Okay. Did you have questions on this, other than this is your amendment? This is what you submitted?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Is there anything else?
Mr. Slade, no, sir, I think you can
Okay,
take it.
can I take that then? And I'm going to put down at the bottom. Do you have a clip for me?
When I ask for one.
It's going to be called PH3. Thank you.
Yes, sir, thank you. Now, Mr. Slade, the amended complaint that you submitted, it included pictures of a boat, or picture of two boats, correct, sir? A picture of two boats?
I've just seen the frame around one boat.
Okay. I'm going to, can I approach and show you what was previously introduced as PH1?
Okay.
That was the Facebook post, correct, sir, that you created for your Carlos Slade for Nassau County Tax Collector, correct?
Yes,
And there's a picture that you basically embedded into your Facebook post there of a boat, and you can actually see two boats in that picture, correct, sir?
correct, two boats.
Okay. Is that the same picture that you submitted in support of your amended complaint against Mr. Drew?
Yes, the boat that's in the center, the first boat.
Okay. But your allegation against Mr. Drew was that he was storing two boats that he owned on tax collector property, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And
Well, here they are. So this is the picture, right?
Yes, sir, that's the same
Two
picture.
boats. There's one in the background and one in the foreground.
yes, sir. And that's the same picture, Your Honor, that was embedded on the Facebook page. That's in PH1, okay? Now, Mr. Slade, if I'm here, sorry, retrieving. Now, you allege that this boat belonged to Mr. Drew, correct?
I'm sorry, objection, I'm not clear as to what this.
He's pointing at one or the other. Which one are you pointing to? There were two boats. There was one in the foreground and one in the background.
Was it your allegation that both boats belonged to Mr. Drew?
When I took that picture, sir, there were a total of 3 boats on that property. I had left to come back to take the picture again. The boat, where was one boat missing. So when I took that picture, the boat that was next to that boat in the picture, it was moved, it was gone.
Okay. So was it your allegation that both of these boats belonged to Mr. Drew?
No,
Both the
just
boats that were in the picture, the foreground and the background?
the one in the background did not belong to Mr. Drew. It is marked State Law Enforcement Officer.
Okay. So now, so at the time that you memorialized this, you took this picture, you didn't have a picture of the other boat that you're now claiming belonged to Mr. Drew?
That is correct. It was moved at the time I went back.
And Judge, just so you know, I'm showing him the picture. It's
Sure.
Exhibit 1.
It's in the complaint. I know, I'm familiar with the picture.
It's also Exhibit 1 in that notebook that we gave you earlier. It's just-
Exhibit 1
Yes,
in
sir.
your notebook.
Yes, sir. It's just a picture.
Okay, good. But we'll put in R1 as well, okay, just so it's repeat, but that's fine.
All right?
R1. Received without,
Objection.
okay.
So now, what information did you have that Mr. Drew owned boats?
When I first did my investigation to look, I noticed that Mr. Drew was storing his camper there. So when I looked on his financial form, the ethics code S6 or whatever, I looked on the form and it states Mr. Drew owns a pop-up camper, as well as it states that Mr. Drew owns 2 boats. And that's what I looked at to make my
And you
determination.
got that, where'd you get that from?
Off his financial form that he files with the
Oh,
Ethics
okay.
Commission in the state of Florida.
I need-
And that's how I came from the camper to realizing that there was a total of 3 boats there, but 2 of them looked to be civilian boats.
Now, the amended complaint, Judge, and just for ease of reference, it's got, I believe it should have some handwritten numbers. If you turn the page, it should have like A2, A3.
Yeah.
A3 involves the allegation of misuse of public office. It says John Drew in his financial disclosure states he owns 2
Show it
boats.
to the witness.
I'm sorry, Judge.
Yes.
Okay. And that's your allegation, correct, sir, that you made in your amended complaint?
Yes.
Okay. And if I may just read it. So,
Sure.
John Drew in his financial disclosure states that he owns 2 boats. These boats have been and continue to be stored on state-owned property that the tax collector leases from the state of Florida. So when you filed this allegation, this complaint, you were saying that his boats, both of his boats, were still being stored on state-owned property, correct?
Correct.
Okay,
I
what,
thought those were his boats.
and the only 2 boats that you could document when you filed this complaint were these 2 boats that are pictured here, one in the foreground, one in the background, correct?
Just the 1 boat, sir.
Okay. All right. So when you made the allegation against Mr. Drew, you alleged that he had, both of his boats were being stored on state-owned property, correct?
That is correct, as I told the investigator in that. I told him 1 boat was moved. I could not be sure that I took it, since they were private-looking boats, they were civilian boats.
All right. And what other investigation did you do, sir, to try to determine who actually owned these boats? Or this boat? Pictured in,
Well, I went on to the, I can't run a tag or anything, so.
Why not?
Because I'm not a law enforcement personnel and I'm not a tax collector. I don't have the luxury of somebody that works inside those departments to do that.
did you make an attempt to go to this tax collector's office and make a public records request for the vehicle registration that was depicted on this boat?
No, sir, at that time, what had happened is that I had got caught up with medical emergencies in my family. My mother-in-law was stricken, who recently just passed away, and everything with my brother of his health issue at this time that was going on.
At
And
the
I just
time,
did
I'm sorry
not,
to interrupt. At the time, what was going on?
medical for all its medical emergencies of health in my family.
While you were
myself.
trying to file these complaints, your family was going through medical emergencies?
I did not, I'm answering your question, sir, I did not have enough time. I just didn't think about the public records request to find out who the boats belong to. So the investigation I did, I went to the website of the DMV for vessels. And when I popped in, all I could pop in was this number here, because I cannot get on this property, it's behind a locked
Okay,
gate.
you're pointing to
The whole number.
the
There's
whole
a
number, and you
registrar-
put that, you did go and looked at
I
that?
went to the state, to the vessel of the DMV, and popped that boat in numerous times, and it wouldn't pop up, it wouldn't give me no information on it.
But there is a search feature online. I mean, you didn't have to go anywhere to do it. You can search a vessel registration.
That was
online.
the search I went online to, and it didn't give me anything.
Okay. And it didn't come up, Mr. Drew belongs to this boat for sure, right?
It didn't come up to anything, sir.
But it would have, right? I mean, if it had belonged to Mr. Drew, it would have come back and said this boat is registered to John Drew, correct?
Objection. Yeah, it's argumentative, it's argumentative.
Okay. Now, did it cross your mind at all that perhaps the boat that's parked right next to a clearly marked Florida Wildlife Freshwater Fish Commission boat, that this boat may also be affiliated with FWC? Did it cross your mind at all?
No, sir, because that's looks like a personal recreation boat.
Okay. And is it true, sir, the way you took this picture, you're taking the picture looking at the boats, the test track that you referenced where the camper was parked is behind this lake, across the other side of this lake, correct, sir?
No, it's not, sir.
Okay, where?
That test track where that camper is, if I may show may I show it on that clear picture
Yeah.
instead of this black and white?
Yes.
There's an office right there.
Okay, that's what I really want to ask you about. So
Off to the left.
Off to the left here is an office.
what kind of office?
Back in the day, it was a building, I guess, when the former tax collector, Gwendolyn Miller, when I talked to her, she told me how she got the property to leave from downtown Bernardina to get there and what it was used for. That was a FHP stop station. There is no big signs or nothing that I would have known it was FWC. That is a retention pond where they drive the courses.
There's
on.
water behind the boat,
Right.
it's a retention pond. On the left, you understood that it'd be an FHP stop station.
At one time it was, it is
Okay,
not
but-
active.
And
FWC.
To answer his question,
Uh-huh.
the camper is behind, is
the
over
camper
here.
is on the left of
Yes,
that
sir.
picture.
Yes,
Do you
sir.
have a picture of the camper?
Yes, sir.
Where's the picture of the camper? Is it in your
It's-
amended complaint?
It is, Judge. There's a picture of it.
Okay.
It's kind of.
That right here is to the left.
That is correct, sir.
If you just kept panning left from this exhibit R1, or that pictures of these two boats, you'd come up with the camper picture, which is on the back, the last page of the amended complaint,
Yes.
number 1623. Okay, go ahead.
This is attached in Wiley's report. Okay. So now there's an FWC stop station or substation right next to these boats, correct?
I presume there was no signs out there, no big signs stating that it was a FWC, and I've never filed for fishing license or anything to go there.
Okay. And now you just assumed that these boats belong to Mr. Drew based upon what you reviewed in his financial disclosures. You just presumed they had to belong to him, correct?
Correct, since the camper was stored on the property, and then the one boat went missing.
Now, do we have one for the witness? I can show him. Please. Now, Now, sir, you included Mr. Drew's financial disclosure forms as part, incorporated that into your complaint, correct? Your
Yes,
amended
sir.
complaint?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach again?
Sure.
I'm going to approach with exhibits 18 and 19 that are in our notebook we provided to the court judge, R18 and R19.
R18 and 19, are they the same as,
It would be in our book here, sir.
are they the same as pages,
No, sir.
okay. R18 and R19. Okay, are those,
Just beginning with R18,
yeah,
is that a fair and accurate depiction of the picture that you submitted in support of your complaint?
That is the picture that I submitted.
Okay. And then now R19 would actually be,
R18 is same as, it's color of R1, is that
yes, sir.
correct?
Yes, sir, it
Okay.
is.
And then 19,
You see R19 there, sir, Mr. Slay?
Yes.
Okay. Now, is that the building that you're talking about, the stop station?
This picture here is new to me. I don't know whose boat this is. That boat was never on the property
Okay.
when I took pictures.
Do you recognize that building, sir?
If that's the building that's on the tax collector's office, that would be the building, but not from this side view shot.
You don't recognize
This
it?
was taken on the property close to the building. The picture that I took, I was outside the fence.
Did you give me 22?
We're not allowed to get up on that property.
I'm just asking you, sir, do you recognize that building or no?
Yes,
Is that the building that's next to where the boats are parked that you photographed?
I need to, well, this is a color picture, so yes. It's a building.
Okay, that's the stop station that you've referenced now, correct? That was that WC stop station?
Yes,
Okay. Now, do you have 20 as well, sir? R20, did I give you?
no.
I don't think I did. You got it, sir.
I mean, they have a stop station, you have an aerial as well in part of 19. I mean, what's the point? You trying to make a point?
Sir?
You trying to make a point?
Yes, sir. I just trying to see if you can identify those.
You see,
Yes, sir, yes, sir, that's it.
That
That is the tax collector's office right there, and that would be the
the
stop
tax
station.
collectors is the big on the left?
Yes,
That's the
sir.
tax collectors?
Yes,
And the stop station is there?
that is
And the
correct.
votes were between the tax collector's office and the stop station?
Correct, where that arrow is.
And you were down near the lake taking pictures?
I was
and you
on,
were
no,
across
sir,
the street?
I was in the ditch by the road.
You were in the ditch by
Yeah,
the
on the
road?
fence line.
So north of, if that's north-south?
I was right about, if I may mistake.
Yes, you need to explain it for the record. You're looking at the last photo, or the last photo of 19, and the upper portion, just tell me where the
This
votes
is
were.
A1A. I was parked on the ditch line here, and that is the fence to the tax collector's office.
Okay, assuming there's an arrow that's pointing
To a boat.
to a boat, you were near the arrow, the beginning of the arrow, not
Yes,
the
sir.
end of it.
That is correct, at the beginning up here. I had
Okay,
to jump
that's where
over
you
the
were
ditch
taking-
on the
okay.
fence
I'm
line.
sorry, everyone's speaking at the
I'm
same
sorry,
time. I
yes.
can't get a clean record.
And this picture photographed in 19,
Yes.
this Key West, that boat was never on property, and that picture had to be shot from right here, and those are locked gates on the tax collector's property right there. Nobody can go in there, you're not allowed back.
So you're saying 19 was not,
I never submitted that picture
Okay.
or know anything about that
you
picture.
didn't submit any of the pictures that are in R19? Okay,
No.
go ahead.
Now, but the angle of the picture that you did submit, it didn't include that stop station that's right there, correct?
That is correct, because I was taking the picture of the boat,
Right.
not of the stop station.
Now, in the front of that stop station, there were stickers on the window that designated that building was basically controlled by law enforcement, Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, and Florida Highway Patrol, correct, sir?
There were stickers on the building.
Yes, sir. On the windows?
But there's not signs outside stating that it's a stop station for, those are just stickers.
I understand, I'm just asking you, those stickers were there when you were there, correct?
Yes,
Okay, and then there's that big FWCC boat that's right next to the building too, right? You did see that big Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission boat that was in your picture?
as I stated to you and Mr. Malloy, investigated as a FWC law enforcement boat. That is not Mr. Drew's.
Right, but that was there, so you had stickers on the building saying it was FWCC's, at least stickers on the building, right next to the FWCC boat, and then another boat, and then you tried to search the hull, or the registration for the boat. Couldn't obtain any records according to you, correct?
That is correct.
And did you contact the property appraiser's office or anything like that, or tax collector's office, to ask for any public records related to the registrations that were affiliated with John Drew?
As I stated previously, during a time with my family members and my wife's mother being sick and everything, I just did not make a public records request to the tax collector's office or anyone.
Okay, but you could have.
Recently, I did place a public records request in to the FWC once it was established to me after the Ethics Commission wrapped up its investigation of an affidavit that come in that I was never privileged to see. Nobody never showed it to me.
Okay. But you had time to file these complaints against Mr. Drew and amend them multiple times. But your testimony is you didn't have time to submit a public records request to the tax collector's office for any boats that were registered to John Drew.
At that time, sir, my family fell sick and the death of them dying.
Right. But
I
that,
did
but
not make
those,
no public records request on it.
okay. But those illnesses didn't prevent you though, sir, from amending these complaints a multitude of times, correct?
No, they did not. They were made before that.
All right, now, the financial disclosure forms that you referenced.
Are you submitting R18 and R19?
I think they've already been introduced as our bench binder. Is that, can I move the bench binder in? I mean, to the extent.
Move the entire bench binder?
No, we object to that.
I was just, 18 or 19, and 19 are sitting out there. There are these photos that you talked about.
Yes, sir, I would.
Any objection?
So as to 18, I believe that's Mr. Slay's photo.
Correct.
So I don't have an objection to 18.
Yeah.
As to 19, I don't know who took that.
That's true, there's no, but he's identified them as what they are. Is
We
that
don't,
okay?
we don't know what the boat is, so I mean,
Right.
I don't have a problem with, certainly it's a photo of a boat on that property, but we don't know what boat that is, and so
Correct.
with that understanding, I don't have an objection to it,
Right.
I don't know what the evidentiary value of that.
Right, so I'm just gonna allow it in, but obviously, no, there's been no testimony as to what boat that was. It's up.
You can write it. I'm trying to get this.
Go ahead.
Yes, sir.
R18 and R19 are admitted,
Thank you, Judge.
received into evidence.
Thank you, Judge. Sorry about that. Now, Mr. Slay, the amended complaint, A-023, the amendment to that complaint that you submitted, you included the financial disclosure forms that you relied on, correct?
Correct.
And the financial disclosure forms I'm referencing are those of Mr. Drew, where he discussed or he listed that he owned boats, correct?
Correct.
Now,
Are they in the, they're in the complaint, is that what you're saying?
they are in the complaint.
Okay.
They were attached.
Yeah, I see it. Looking at RH3, I mean, PH3.
So I'm just going to show you a section of the Form 6. There's handwritten numbers on those as well, Your Honor, and I'm not sure what the handwritten number is that's down on the bottom of that one.
Is this the 2012 disclosure? Or the 2000,
14, Your Honor, I believe.
the Form 6? Okay. What page?
92, there's like a handwritten
Okay,
number.
92, I see.
You
it.
see that? In the middle there, it just, Part B, assets, is the asset section of the financial disclosure form. Is that what you submitted? You recall that, Mr. Slay?
Yes.
Okay. And you submitted this in furtherance of your allegation that this boat belonged to Mr. Drew, correct?
In In reference to which picture, sir? The original picture?
Yes.
This one right here?
Right. Your allegation, that's Mr. Drew's boat.
Yes, assume with the camper that he owned was being stored on the property and the form stating that he had 2 boats.
Yes, sir.
I assume that was them, that was the only 2 boats at the time, as I said previously, on the property, and the other boat was moved.
Right. But you still alleged in your complaint that both boats were still being stored on the property, correct? Even though one had been moved?
At the time of the filing of the complaint, yes, then they were moved, the one boat.
When you filed your complaint, you knew both boats weren't there?
Objection, asked and answered.
He can ask it one more time. Go ahead.
Sir, when you submitted your complaint, you alleged that both of Mr. Drew's boats were being stored on that property, even though you knew it. When you submitted your complaint, only one boat that you claimed to be confused about could have been stored there as Mr. Drew's, correct?
At the time, there were 2 boats. When I went back, I submitted, and I told the investigator, Mr. Malloy, there were 2 boats on the facility at this time my complaint done went in.
Yes.
And it was a picture of just one boat.
Well, but there were 2 boats at the time. One was just clearly marked FWCC, correct?
Yes, there was a FWC boat there.
All right. And now the financial disclosure form that you relied on, Mr. Drew listed 2 boats, one that he valued at $2,500 and one he valued at $1,500, correct?
Correct.
Which boat was it that you believed the boat that you submitted the picture of was?
Sir, I'm not an appraiser over boats or anything. There was just 2 boats.
Okay.
I'm not an expert on boats.
Well, you're an expert on your complaint. You filed this complaint. Tell us what you were alleging.
There was 2 boats. Mr. Drew had a camper on this form. There was an A-frame camper. That camper was parked on the property. There were 2 boats at the time that I looked. When I took that picture, one was missing. That was not the boat, that Key West boat there that I see. That was not the boat.
Okay.
There
We
was
know which
another
boat.
there. I don't know which boat it was, sir, because I do not have a picture of it. This is the only one that I submitted to them, and I explained it to the investigator the same way.
Right. So the boat that you took a picture of and submitted in support with your complaint, you believed, you were arguing that it had to be one of those 2 boats that Mr. Drew disclosed on his financial disclosure form, correct?
Being with the pop-up camper on the property,
My question is which
everything was
one?
tied together. If a mistake was made that it was not, which afterwards, there was a affidavit, but to the fact, it was still stored property on the personal items on the property
Yes.
stored.
Which one of those 2 boats were you alleging this boat to be?
I know the answer to that, okay? And you do too.
What is it?
Everybody. The one without the Florida designation.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. Then I'm not asking it correctly.
What are you saying?
Of the-
You're looking at, of the 2 boats
Yes.
on he's already asked and answered that as well. I mean, he said he's not a boat expert. He's just saying he thought there were 2 boats on there. One has disappeared. I know, in other words, the testimony is there. I don't want to testify for him, but I think we need to move on.
Sir, at some point, did you not allege that it was the bass boat, the Skeeter bass boat?
Mr. Drew owns a Skeeter bass boat. That's what I was referring to.
And you allege that this boat in this picture was the Skeeter bass boat, correct?
Not that I'm aware of, no, sir.
Okay. I believe it's actually in the complaint.
Well, is it?
I've got to find it out.
Okay, yeah.
I think I gave my copy up there. Okay. In Mr. Moalley's report, page 3, do you still have Mr. Moalley's report in front of you, Mr. Slay?
What paragraph?
It's going to be page 3, it's going to be paragraph 15.
Page 3.
And I'm sorry.
I have it.
Okay. Now, paragraph 13, I'm sorry, sir. Paragraph 13. The last sentence in paragraph 13. Investigator Moali documented where you alleged that the photograph of the two boats you submitted both belonged to Mr. Drew.
Number 13.
Yes, sir. Isn't it true that you alleged to Mr. Moali that both of those boats belong to Mr. Drew?
Let's move on.
Okay. Now, paragraph 14, you testify that you recognize, you now realize that one of the boats you allege belonged to Mr. Drew actually belonged to Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission, correct, sir?
That is what I told Mr. Mullally in his investigation at my home when he talked to me, that one boat belonged to FWC.
You did recognize that at that time when you were interviewed, correct?
I've always have, yes.
Okay. Now, going back to RH1, I'm sorry, Judge.
Okay.
This is the Facebook post, and I don't know if
You still have it, or you haven't given it to me.
I got PH.
You're going to get a copy of that, right?
I believe I did give it back to the witness. Yes, sir.
Does
Yes, sir. I'm sorry, P18. You're right.
Yeah, it's PH1, I'm sorry.
Now, in that post, sir, I believe on June 24th, at this point, when you're authoring this post, sir, you've been made aware of the fact that FWC was claiming ownership of those boats, correct? That the executive director for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission had prepared an affidavit, and it's sworn under oath, that both of those boats belong to FWC, correct?
Objection, that's misstates the evidence.
He's asking if that's true. Were you aware that someone had submitted from FWC an affidavit that did not, that said that both of those boats were FWC boats?
at that time? No, sir, I was not aware of it.
That was the question.
Thank you. But now in your post, you acknowledge on June 24th that FWC is claiming they own those boats. Do you see that? Read it in the highlighted portion. How did you obtain the information that FWC was saying those boats belong to them if you didn't see the affidavit?
If you'll go to the front page, when Mr. Siegel mentions that the boat belongs to FWC, that's how I knew about it.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Siegel stated it, which I did not know about it or anything until the case was closed and I requested the records. And then that's when I seen for the first time the affidavit. So I did not have firsthand knowledge of it, just taking the words.
So Mr. Siegel had responded to your request for a grand jury investigation, correct? With a written letter. He wrote you a letter, correct?
No. Mr. Siegel did not respond to me on the grand jury.
Your request for the grand jury. He did file, he sent a reply, your request for a criminal investigation, correct? A written reply.
You're saying Mr. Siegel sent it to me?
Yes, sir. Your Honor, I direct your attention to R7.
Yeah, well, I'm going to object to this document. a letter that, so it's hearsay, number one. Now we're questioning a witness.
Well, let him, did you ask him whether or not Mr. Siegel sent him a letter?
Yes, I did.
Okay, and what was your response to that?
If it's the letter he's referring to, June 6th, that's the only letter I've received from Mr. Siegel. And that was,
It's June 7th, but that's the letter. Yeah, I was asking, so you did receive a letter from Mr. Siegel?
Okay, and
So
your
now
objection is?
We're objecting to this. It's outside the scope of this case. It's hearsay.
Right,
Unless Mr.
it's
Siegel's
June
coming-
6th of 2016?
Yes, sir.
And this post is June, and you're saying the post has nothing to do with the complaint?
I'm saying that the post may have something to do with it.
Okay.
And that's June 24th.
But the letter from an assistant state attorney that is highly political is something that is just prejudicial. And there's no probative value to that letter.
Well,
And so, I mean, if the letter is being introduced to show when Mr. Slay became aware of FWC
Correct.
having knowledge, if it's only for that purpose, then I won't.
well, because
But-
remember, I've told you about hearsay.
Sure.
Hearsay,
But
Yes.
there's more in that letter that I believe is just of zero probative value and highly prejudicial. And
in
so-
other words, this letter, I mean, you've already indicated, and I think this letter is going to say something about
Right.
this witness and his
And
motives,
That's correct.
which
Is pejorative.
and
and
you
should
could
not.
bring in the state attorney and have him testify as to that, if that was on your witness list.
I believe he is, and I would check to that too.
Well,
But-
maybe, I don't know. Is he coming in?
Is Siegel coming in? He's here.
Okay.
Mr. Siegel's here.
Okay, so,
But this goes to his notice as far as,
yeah, were you aware
yeah,
that the state attorney had advised you that this was not Mr. Drew's boat at the time of the post that you indicated that it was his boat?
indicated, when I found out from Mr. Siegel
Yeah,
that it was the boat, I just made a notation that Mr. Siegel did mention that it was.
oh, okay.
That's all I've done.
See, I don't have that exhibit, so I can't.
it's
review
going to be
it.
R7,
Okay. Well,
Judge.
it's not R7,
I mean-
this is H1, PH1.
I'm sorry, I'm talking about P7 in our
And
notebook.
draw your own conclusion.
In our notebook, Judge.
By the way, the camper and boat pictured below do not belong to FWC.
Right. That's what he says on June 24th. And then in P7, Judge, Mr. Siegel's letter,
Okay,
he says, telling Mr. Slay, he's going through all the allegations. He says, the executive director of the commission prepared an affidavit acknowledging ownership of the vessels, and you are aware of the ownership of the vessels. on
okay.
June 7th. Nonetheless, he posts that.
Is
on-
that accurate, his statement to you that you're aware of the ownership of the vessels and an affidavit? That's what he's asking.
No, sir, that is not correct. In his writing in that letter, yes, I was not made aware of an affidavit. Nothing was produced until I requested the records of the
Afterwards,
investigation.
okay.
Yes, sir,
His letter refers to an affidavit that you're not aware of.
that is correct.
Okay.
So, Mr. Slay, even though the assistant state attorney who basically ran the Nassau County office had wrote you a letter and explicitly advised you that the executive director for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Commission had provided an affidavit saying those vessels belonged to FWC, your contention is that you still did not have any record evidence that that boat belonged to FWC when you authored that Facebook post?
I did not have no affidavit in front of me ever until it was submitted.
Yeah, and here's the problem I'm having with this evidence of your letter. I'm not, it may be prejudicial and all that, but the timing. I mean, aren't we beyond the scope of what we're here for? And that is, at what stage in the investigation was this complaint? Had it been dismissed yet?
No, sir. We filed our response in April with the affidavit
Yeah.
attached.
With
So
the
basically,
affidavit?
yeah, so when he got our response, so even though he's getting all the record evidence, he's just ignoring it, it's still going on Facebook. It goes to us, it's the motive, it's the malice,
I understand.
it was about campaigning,
Okay, I
Judge.
understand. We may see that letter. I may introduce that letter at some point. I don't know that this is the time.
Yes, sir.
But, to go to Mr. Collins' argument, I don't know that I'm going to use those conclusions to draw any of the required showing for a petitioner in
Yes,
this
sir.
case.
I understand.
So for what it is, you had notice that at least allegedly there was an affidavit out there at the time that you submitted something on the internet, H1, indicating that that wasn't a FWC vote. Is that correct?
That vote there in the letter stated to me, that is
Right.
correct, sir,
Right.
that it was, but I did.
But you said let people, you draw your own conclusions. Is that what?
That's correct. They had, to the citizens, the voters,
Okay.
they have to look at stuff
Okay.
themselves and make their own
Okay.
conclusion of it.
Go ahead.
And you did get a copy of Mr. Drew's response, right, to your amended complaint that was filed. You received that in April 2016?
Mr. Drews from,
The Ethics
refresh me,
Commission.
sir.
From the Ethics Commission? You were provided a copy of the response, correct?
Of what, I know, of filing the amended complaint, yes, but I'm trying to find out which complaint you're trying to refer to, sir, that I looked at, Mr. Drew's response.
You were provided copies of Mr. Drew's response that he submitted to the Ethics Commission in response to your complaints against him, correct?
No, sir, I don't believe I was, if that was under investigation, I didn't, nobody never sent me anything of Mr. Drew's response.
Okay. I'll do this again. Hold on.
Yeah.
I need to-
Actually, what we need to do is take a break if this is going to be longer. Are we going to get done today?
I'm almost finished. I mean, I literally was about to ask them if they had anything else. I just wanted to show you.
I mean, done with your side of the case
Yes, sir.
in 5 minutes?
No.
We need a bathroom break, is what we're.
I can hold it. It's-
Yeah, that's what I mean. If we-
My cross of Mr. Slade will be done in 5 minutes, I believe.
Let's finish it.
Yes, sir.
Do you have anything else you want to ask him? Just make a copy. Can I, let's come,
Sylvia with the copies.
she's bringing copies.
I'll tell you what,
Just take 5 minutes.
we're thinking about a lunch break. We're going to go into the afternoon, correct, Mr. Collins?
Frankly, I can't imagine they're gonna rest today, but yeah.
I'm
one in the
surprised.
afternoon.
Huh? You'd be
Hopefully-
surprised
Hopefully
too?
I'll surprise y'all.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna have cross of this witness, and
Of
we're
course.
not gonna be done till 2 or 3, and then there are 3 witnesses in the hallway. I mean, I
Right.
don't think this gets done.
It-
We'll see.
The thing is, yeah, I mean, but you need to think about what this does on both sides of the issue. Let's get the evidence and let's get it done. What I'm gonna do is right now, we're gonna break for 45 minutes. And I'm gonna let you just finish up with him briefly and then you do your cross, okay?
The parties agree that all discussion after lunch, but for what the judge is going to say in a moment, is off the record.
Right, and the parties, at the request of the parties, I understand it's been resolved. The parties want this case to be closed and relinquish jurisdiction back to the Commission on Ethics if they require it for the entry of a final order of dismissal and the parties will advise the commission that they've resolved the matter, okay?
Yes, sir.
That's what's going to happen. And on the record, I'm going to give them back all the exhibits that were forwarded because I don't need them anymore, okay?